The air carried the scent of old leather and polished wood. Eleanor Vance sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap. Her heart thrummed against her ribs. She knew this moment would define the next chapter of her life. Silas Thorne sat across the mahogany desk, his dark eyes analyzing her. His tailored suit made him appear imposing, a shadow made flesh. She had spent weeks preparing for this interview, perfecting every answer. Her brown hair was pulled back into a severe bun, hiding vulnerability. Her blue eyes, usually sharp, were softened to give an impression of meekness, exactly as she intended. The small scar above her left eyebrow was barely visible. Defiance screamed within her, masked by quiet efficiency. She was 28 but felt 1,000 years old, burdened by grief. Arthur's kind, weary face was a burning ember beneath her composure. His silver streak and dark hair flashed through her mind, a ghost she could almost touch. Silas Thorne spoke, his voice a low rumble. It was calm, yet it carried absolute authority. "Miss Vance," he began, pausing to make the silence stretch, to make her feel his attention. "Your resume is impressive. Flawless, in fact. Too flawless, perhaps." A faint curve touched his lips, a smile not reaching his eyes. Eleanor's fingers, hidden beneath the desk, curled into tight fists. She fought to keep her breathing even, to hide the tremor within. He was testing her, probing for any crack in her armor. "I believe in thoroughness, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice soft but steady, professional, not defensive. Her mind raced through years of careful planning, the fabrication of her past. Every detail had been accounted for, every reference checked, every employment gap explained. She had lived a double life for months, honing this new persona. The air felt thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of secrets. She could taste the fear, sharp and metallic, mingling with Silas's cigar scent. He leaned back, a subtle shift commanding attention. The movement was fluid, deliberate, like a predator assessing its prey. "Thoroughness," he repeated. "Or perhaps a meticulous attention to detail that borders on obsession." His gaze never left hers, a physical pressure pinning her. Eleanor swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She could feel the slight dampness on her palms, a small betrayal of her composure. She wished for a glass of water, anything to break his stare. The silence stretched, long and uncomfortable, punctuated by the building's hum. "In my experience, Mr. Thorne," she said precisely, "attention to detail is a virtue, especially in a profession requiring discretion and trust." She met his gaze directly, a calculated risk. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against her calm exterior. She knew she was walking a razor's edge. One wrong word, one flicker of genuine emotion, and everything she had planned would shatter. Arthur's face, smiling then gone, swam before her, a silent plea for justice. Silas Thorne held her gaze for what felt like an eternity, searching, probing. She wondered if he saw through her, if her true intentions screamed from her eyes. The thought sent a jolt of icy fear through her veins. He was known for his intuition, his ability to strip away facades. Many had underestimated him. His reputation preceded him, a dark shadow beyond this office. He ruled with force and an almost supernatural understanding of human nature, its weaknesses and desires. She had to be flawless. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Very well, Miss Vance," he said, his mouth twitching, a flicker she couldn't decipher. "You're hired." The words, simple yet monumental, resonated deep within Eleanor. A wave of both relief and terror washed over her. Relief that she had succeeded, terror that her dangerous game had truly begun. She felt a lightness, a momentary reprieve, then the crushing weight of her purpose. This was not a victory. It was merely the opening move in a battle she was determined to win. Eleanor maintained her calm, offering a polite nod. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice perfectly modulated, betraying none of the earthquake raging inside. She rose from her chair with practiced grace, gathering her handbag. Every movement was controlled, precise. As she turned to leave, she felt his eyes on her back, a tangible presence boring into her. He was already watching, always watching. The game was on. Her first day at the Thorne Estate office was a blur of polished surfaces and hushed tones. The estate was immense, a fortress disguised as a mansion, its grounds offering no easy access or escape. Inside, dark wood gleamed, Persian rugs muted sound, and expensive artwork adorned walls. The air was thick with expensive cigars and old money, a scent she associated with Silas Thorne. Her new office was spacious, positioned strategically just outside Silas's private chambers. It had a large window overlooking a lush garden, but her focus was always inward, toward the oak door separating her from her target. She spent the morning familiarizing herself with the intricate filing system, phones, and security protocols. Each document felt like a clue, each hushed conversation a piece of a darker puzzle. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, typing memos and scheduling appointments with robotic efficiency. On the surface, she was the perfect executive assistant, anticipating needs, maintaining quiet competence. Internally, a storm raged. Her mission pressed down, a suffocating presence. She was living a lie, every smile a calculated deception. From her vantage point, she could occasionally catch glimpses of Silas Thorne. He moved with dangerous calm, his gestures economical, his presence commanding. She watched him through his office door, sometimes on the phone, his voice a low murmur, other times at his desk, staring out the window, his expression unreadable. He looked like a man who carried the weight of empires. Every interaction with associates was brief, filled with unspoken understanding of years of shared history and unspeakable deeds. She studied Marcus Blackwood, Silas's loyal lieutenant, muscular with assessing eyes, a watchful predator. Marcus often lingered near Silas's office, a reminder of the watchful eyes within the organization. Eleanor noted the way Silas's jawline tightened when he was displeased, the subtle clench of his hand around a pen. She observed how even casual conversations held deeper meaning, a veiled command or an unspoken threat. His presence radiated power, a silent force making the air hum with tension. He was 45, carrying the authority of an older man, tempered by the sharp energy of one constantly on guard. She saw his dark, piercing eyes sweep a room, missing nothing, taking in every detail. It was like living under a constant, invisible spotlight. Her stomach churned with fear and grim determination. This man, Silas Thorne, was the reason Arthur was gone. The thought solidified her resolve, hardening her grief into a sharp blade. She imagined the cold, calculating mind behind those dark eyes, the ruthless ambition that led to her uncle's demise. She remembered the phone call, the detached voice telling her of Arthur's unfortunate accident. It was a lie, she knew it in her bones, and Silas Thorne was at the heart of it. The scent of expensive cologne, lingering after Silas passed, became intertwined with her animosity, a constant reminder of her enemy. The day crawled by, each hour an exercise in sustained tension. She answered calls, scheduled meetings, and managed correspondence, her radar scanning for threats, for opportunities, for truth. She felt like a spy in enemy territory, every nerve-ending alert, every muscle coiled. The smooth desk, the soft keyboard click, the distant murmurs, and all were part of the stage for her dangerous role. The oak door to Silas's office hummed with unspoken secrets, a magnetic pull. Later, city lights blurred outside her taxi window as she made her way back to her discreet apartment. The building's anonymity, its sterile cleanliness, contrasted sharply with the Thorne estate. It was a small, sparsely furnished space, chosen for its lack of character, its ability to disappear. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and old paper, a comfort after Silas's oppressive world. She locked the door behind her, the click echoing, and let out a shuddering breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her shoulders slumped, the weight of the day suddenly immense. She walked to the small, worn wooden chest she kept by her bed. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing the few personal touches she allowed herself. Among them was a single framed photograph of her uncle, Arthur. He smiled from the picture, his eyes crinkling, a testament to the warmth she remembered. Beside the photograph, nestled on faded velvet, lay Arthur's tarnished watch. She picked it up, her fingers closing around the cold metal. It was a simple silver pocket watch, dulled and scratched from years of use. A hairline crack marred its face, running from the 3 o'clock mark to the center. It had stopped at precisely 11:17, the exact moment of his supposed accident. The coldness of the metal seeped into her skin, a reminder of grief's icy grip on her heart. She turned it over in her palm, tracing the worn engravings on the back, a faded inscription she knew by heart. This watch was the last thing found on him, a silent witness to whatever horror had transpired. It was her anchor, her fuel, her constant, unyielding promise. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the watch. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting them back. No room for tears, not until justice. Her throat tightened with a familiar ache, a profound sense of loss that never truly faded. Arthur had been more than an uncle. He had been a father figure, a confidant, the one person who truly understood her. His gentle voice echoed in her memory, a stark contrast to her harsh world. The weight of his absence was a physical burden, pressing down on her chest. She clutched the watch tighter, its coldness steadying her turmoil. Every scratch, every dull patch connected her to Arthur, to the life cruelly taken. This watch was not just an object. It was a symbol, a silent vow whispered in the dark. It fueled the vengeance that brought her here, into the viper's nest, disguised as a secretary. She imagined Silas Thorne, his calm demeanor, his piercing eyes, and the fury inside her intensified. He would pay. The next morning, Eleanor arrived early at the Thorne estate, the watch tucked away, a silent promise in her mind. She moved through the grand halls, the opulence merely a backdrop to her grim purpose. The office was quiet, the air fresh before the day's events stirred its heavy atmosphere. She arranged her desk, ensuring every pen and paperclip was precisely where it belonged. Her professional facade was firmly in place, a seamless mask that hid the turmoil within. She settled into her new desk chair. The desk's polished surface reflected the overhead lights. She picked up a file, pretending to review it, but her senses were attuned to the hallway. She heard the estate coming to life, the rustle of cleaning staff, a hushed conversation. Then a distinct shift in the air, a subtle change in the quiet corridor. A shadow fell across her office door. Silas Thorne passed, his heavy footsteps barely audible. He did not pause, did not speak, but his head turned imperceptibly toward her. Eleanor felt his scrutinizing gaze sweep over her, a cold, intense assessment piercing through her facade. For a moment she felt exposed, as if her true intentions screamed from her soul. Her skin prickled, her heart gave a sudden thump. He was watching. She knew it. The game had truly begun. The scent of leather and old money hung thick in the air, a sharp contrast to Eleanor's usual order. Silas Thorne's office was far from efficient. Papers scattered across the mahogany desk, ancient documents mixed with recent reports. A half-empty coffee mug sat near important files. Dust motes danced in the morning light, revealing neglect that grated on Eleanor. Her fingers twitched with an urge to bring order. This was her mission. She spent her first day methodically clearing the clutter. Each movement was deliberate. Her sharp blue eyes scanned for any hint of the darkness that had consumed her Uncle Arthur. The heavy silence was broken only by rustling paper and her keyboard's soft click. She felt Silas's unseen presence, a shadow across the opulent office. Every folder, every drawer was a potential clue or a trap. Her heart maintained a steady, almost artificial rhythm, hiding the frantic search within. She found outdated ledgers, dense figures, old correspondence, and antique maps. Nothing concrete, just layers of the mundane, masking what she knew lay beneath. A thin film of dust covered a framed photograph of a stern man in uniform. It was another reminder of Silas's world, a world of power. She carefully cleaned it, her mind elsewhere. She pushed legal documents aside, revealing a small, intricately carved wooden box. Her breath caught. This was a detail her training prepared her for. Her fingers brushed the cool wood. The box was locked. No key. She made a mental note of its location. She would not force it yet. Patience was crucial. The air grew heavy with unspoken secrets. Later that afternoon, the quiet shattered. The heavy oak door to Silas's private office swung open. He strode through, his presence filling the space. The scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood, and something metallic preceded him. He ignored her, walking directly to his polished desk. His movements were fluid. Eleanor kept her gaze lowered, hands busy with files, but every nerve ending buzzed. She felt the room's energy shift, a sudden tension only Silas could conjure. He picked up the antique telephone receiver. Its brass gleamed. He turned his back to her, shoulders squared, a silent dismissal. Yet she knew he sensed her every breath. His voice, usually a deep baritone, dropped to a hushed murmur. Eleanor strained to hear, her pen recorder ready. She pretended to review a document, her eyes tracing unread lines. Loose ends, Silas murmured, a low thrum. A coldness traced Eleanor's spine. The words hung heavy. Unforeseen complications. He paused, listening. His posture was rigid. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the pen. She tried to glimpse his expression in the dark window pane, but his face stayed obscured. She heard a lighter click, then cigar smoke mingled with his cologne. Yes, it has to be handled, he continued with finality. Discreetly, no more mistakes. The words felt like a blow. They echoed the vague phrases she heard after her uncle's death. Was he speaking of Arthur? Was this proof? Her mind raced, gut churning with fear and grim satisfaction. This was the first crack in his polished armor. He ended the call, replacing the receiver with a soft thud. He turned slowly, dark eyes sweeping the room, lingering on Eleanor. A quiet assessment. Her breath hitched. She met his gaze briefly, offering a small, professional smile, then returned to her files. She hoped her face hid her turmoil. Eleanor, he said, voice calm. She looked up, spine stiffening. Come in here, please. She pushed her chair back. The soft squeak sounded loud. She walked into his office. The vast room felt smaller, suffocating. Air was thick with cigar scent. He leaned back in his chair, hands clasped, observing her. The silence stretched between them. You've done a good job with the case out there, he finally said. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, not reaching his eyes. My predecessor, Mr. Henderson, left things unruly. Eleanor nodded, her expression neutral. I aim for efficiency, Mr. Thorne. Indeed, his eyes narrowed. Efficiency is a virtue, but sometimes life needs a different attention. He pushed a small, velvet-covered box across the desk. It was old, faded. I have a task for you, Eleanor, one requiring a delicate touch. Her heart pounded. This was the test, her moment. She reached for the box, fingers brushing the aged fabric. It felt cool. She opened it carefully, revealing an antique locket. The metal was tarnished, intricately engraved, very old. It felt light in her palm. This belonged to my grandmother, Silas explained, his voice softer, wistful. It contrasted his ruthless phone tone. Eleanor's mind noted it, an attempt to disarm her. She remained impassive. It's beautiful, Mr. Thorne, she murmured, voice steady. It is, he agreed, his gaze on the locket. But it is broken. The clasp, it needs repair, not by just anyone. Find a craftsman, someone who understands its value, someone discreet, someone who can restore it without altering its history. Eleanor looked at him, then the locket. This was an unusual request, far from secretarial work. It was personal. Was it a test of discretion, resourcefulness, or loyalty? A diversion? Her mind raced. I understand, she said quietly. I will make inquiries, Mr. Thorne. I will find the right person. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Good. Discretion is paramount. This is a personal matter. His dark, unreadable eyes fixed on hers, a silent challenge. He sought something. Eleanor met his gaze, her blue eyes unwavering, showing only competence. She placed the locket back in its velvet box. I will treat it with utmost care, Mr. Thorne. He gave a small nod, dismissing her. Eleanor returned to her desk, the velvet box clutched. The locket, seemingly innocuous, felt heavy now, unsettling. Her role was more than a secretary. She was a tool to be tested. The thought sent a jolt of fear and grim determination through her. The next few days blurred with tasks. Eleanor researched master jewelers, filtering out the flashy. She made discreet calls from a burner phone. Never the Thorne line. Each interaction was a delicate dance, gathering info without revealing too much, assessing reputations for silence. She delved into obscure societies, places she never imagined. It was tedious, but it maintained her cover while she observed Silas's routines. She watched him, catching glimpses of his interactions, his shifts in mood. He was a man of contrasts, cold, distant, yet sometimes polite, always intense. She never lowered her guard. Her senses were heightened to every cue. The security system's hum, his cigar smoke, the rhythm of his footsteps, all became her internal map of danger. He rarely took lunch, preferring dark coffee, often brought by Marcus Blackwood, his loyal lieutenant. Marcus was a constant shadow, his watchful presence palpable. Eleanor felt his eyes on her often, a quick, assessing glance. She responded with a bland, professional smile, maintaining her meek persona. Marcus was Silas's eyes and ears. She could not arouse his suspicion. One afternoon, Eleanor was cataloging rare books in Silas's private library. It was a task he assigned without explanation. She found herself alone in the vast room. The rich aroma of old paper and leather filled the air. She ran her fingers along ancient spines, her mind half on task, half on her true purpose. She found local history books, pausing at a thick, leather-bound volume. Its pages were yellowed. She opened it, scanning for names, for any connection to Arthur Vance, to his dealings. Nothing. Her thoughts returned to the locket. She had narrowed her search to 2 craftsmen known for discretion. She compiled reports on each, their histories, clientele, reputations. She drafted a concise summary for Silas, highlighting strengths. It was a test of her judgment. She walked back towards her desk, the report in hand. Nearing Silas's office, she saw him by the window, back turned. The late afternoon light cast long shadows. She cleared her throat softly. He turned, face unreadable. "Eleanor, you have something for me?" "Yes, Mr. Thorne," she replied, holding out the report. "I have a list of potential restorers for your locket. These 2 offer the best combination of skill and discretion." He took the report, his fingers brushing hers. A shiver went through her. His touch was cold. He glanced at the document, then looked up, dark eyes fixed on her. The silence stretched, filled with tension. He was not reading the report. He was reading her. "You've been thorough," he stated, his voice flat. It was an observation. He laid the report on his desk, his gaze still on her. Eleanor felt a tightening in her chest, adrenaline prickling her skin. This was the subtle probing, the testing of her resolve again. He walked around his desk, slow and deliberate, until he stood before her. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a small, rectangular object. Her eyes widened. It was a faded photograph, edges softened, a crease down the center. He held it out. "This is not for the locket," he said, voice low. "This is a new task, a different kind of task." Eleanor took the photograph, fingers brushing the brittle paper. The image was a woman, dark hair in soft waves. Her smile was gentle, her eyes kind. She looked young in her 20s, dressed in an elegant, old-fashioned dress. Her beauty held a quiet strength, but also a hint of melancholy. "I want you to find her," Silas commanded, his voice devoid of emotion, yet heavy. "Find out everything. Where she lived, what she did, who she knew. Every detail, no matter how small." Eleanor looked up from the photograph, her heart pounding. This was unexpected, not secretarial work. This was personal, dangerous. She met his gaze, her mind reeling. The woman held a secret. Eleanor was tasked with uncovering it. The faded photograph felt heavy in Eleanor's hand. It was a brittle square of paper with a woman's soft smile. Silas Thorne had asked her to find information about this woman, his dark eyes unwavering. Eleanor simply nodded, the paper a strange burden. It smelled faintly of lavender, a scent out of place in the stark office. She wondered if this woman was a key to Silas, or just another trap. Days blurred into a rhythm of meticulous organization. Eleanor worked through digital archives with quiet intensity, her fingers dancing. Silas had assigned her the task of streamlining the company's ancient filing system. This was a perfect cover for her true purpose. The screen glowed with endless spreadsheets, layers of data designed to confuse. An ache throbbed behind her eyes from staring at numbers. She began spotting them, faint ripples in the COM data. Large sums moved between shell corporations with names like Crimson Dusk Holdings and Silent Harbor Investments. Vague descriptions hid significant expenditures, like consulting fees that dwarfed budgets. Operational adjustments left gaping holes in the ledger. Each inconsistency was a cold drop on her skin. These were not mistakes. They were deliberate obfuscations, a digital maze. The air around her seemed thick with old money and illicit dealings. Eleanor saved copies of every suspicious file. She transferred them to a secure, encrypted drive hidden deep within her laptop. Her heartbeat quickened often, a frantic drum against her ribs. The faint hum of server racks felt like a living entity, listening. She imagined Silas's piercing eyes watching, even when she knew he was miles away. Paranoia became a constant companion, a tightening knot in her stomach. Every click felt like a potential betrayal. One afternoon, she found an opportunity to approach Marcus Blackwood. The break room air smelled of strong coffee. Eleanor found him leaning against the counter, sipping in silence. His assessing eyes met hers as she entered. The silence stretched between them. "Rough day with the numbers, Marcus?" she asked, forcing a casual smile. She poured coffee, the hot liquid warming her hands. A subtle tremor ran through her fingers. Marcus grunted, a low sound. He took another slow sip. "Always numbers, Eleanor. They never lie, do they?" His tone held a dry edge. "Not usually," Eleanor agreed, matching his casualness. Her every nerve ending screamed with alert. She took a tentative sip of her own coffee, its bitterness a welcome distraction. Unless someone wants them to. She watched his face for any reaction. He chuckled, a short, humorless sound. "You're learning quickly, Vance. This isn't your typical 9 to 5. Things here are different." He paused, letting the implication hang. His dark eyes held hers for too long. A sudden chill spread through her. Eleanor swallowed, her throat dry. "Every workplace has unique rhythms, I suppose." She tried deflecting, feigning discomfort. "I'm just trying to make sense of the older files. Some historical transactions seem a little unconventional." Marcus pushed himself off the counter. His movements were fluid. "Unconventional is a good word for it," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The musky scent of his cologne reached her. "Silas likes things his way, and his way isn't always found in a textbook." He gave her a small, knowing smirk. "Keep asking questions like that, Eleanor, and you might just find some answers you weren't looking for." He walked away, leaving Eleanor alone. The silence amplified her thumping heart. His words echoed, a subtle threat. He had told her nothing concrete, yet confirmed everything. The organization was dangerous. Her coffee felt suddenly cold. That evening, her apartment door clicked shut. The facade crumbled. The small space, usually her sanctuary, felt empty. The scent of dust emphasized her loneliness. She kicked off her shoes, a soft thud on the rug. The day's relentless vigilance settled onto her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She walked to the chipped ceramic mug on her counter. She picked it up, the rough texture a grounding sensation. Her fingers traced the faded floral pattern, a memory of Arthur and his quiet morning coffee. A cold wave of loneliness washed over her. She missed his presence. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in her eyes. They blurred her sparse living room. She let them fall, silent rivers down her cheeks. It was a release, a moment of raw vulnerability she could never afford at the Thorne estate. Here, in the anonymity of her apartment, she was just Eleanor. She was a woman haunted by grief, burdened by a mission. The silence pressed in on her, broken only by her ragged breathing. She clutched Arthur's tarnished watch. Its cool metal was a familiar comfort. The hairline crack mirrored the fracture in her soul. He would have hated this web of deceit, she thought. He was a simple, honest man. He deserved better than this dark vengeance. She closed her eyes, remembering the silver streak in his dark hair, the way he tapped the watch face. The pain of his loss was a physical ache in her chest. It was a constant pressure. She wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice, but only a soft, broken sob emerged. This mission, meant for closure, was tearing her apart. Every day she wore a mask, a polite secretary. Underneath, a storm of anger churned. A profound weariness settled deep in her bones. Was she losing herself in this pursuit? Was the vengeance worth the cost to her soul? The questions echoed in the empty room, unanswered. She yearned for genuine connection, a soul to share this crushing weight. But there was no one. She was utterly alone. The following morning, the mask was back in place. Her eyes, though shadowed, held a steely resolve. Her loneliness fueled her. It hardened her edges, transforming sorrow into sharp determination. She would not falter. Not now, not so close to understanding. Silas had requested a full audit of all historical physical records. This was a daunting task, involving stacks of dusty files in a neglected storage room. The air was stale, thick with mildew. Eleanor worked methodically, her movements precise. The quiet hum of the ventilation system was the only sound. She sorted through box after box, each one a testament to years of business. She found old correspondence, faded invoices, and annual reports. Her fingers grew smudged with dust. Her throat felt scratchy. She pressed on, driven by an unyielding need to find something. The faint light from the single bulb cast long, shifting shadows. Then she noticed it. Tucked within a stack of routine business reports from 7 years ago, the paper brittle and discolored. A series of peculiar markings. They were not part of the official report. They were small, handwritten symbols scrawled in the margins, almost invisible. They were too organized to be random doodles. The ink was a different dark blue. A shiver traced its way down her spine. Eleanor pulled the report closer. Her heart began to pound. The symbols looked like a rudimentary code, geometric shapes and stylized letters. They appeared sporadically, sometimes in clusters, sometimes spread across pages, embedded in financial summaries. Her fingers trembled. The crinkle of old paper was loud in the silence. She spent an hour painstakingly transcribing the symbols. Her mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. The scent of aged paper filled her nostrils. A cold, terrifying excitement began to build. She knew this was more than a random find. This was a message. Finally, on the last page of the third report, she found a sequence of numbers among the symbols. They stood out in their stark simplicity. She immediately recognized it as a date, written in an unusual format. Her breath hitched. Her eyes widened, a cold dread washing over her. The date was chillingly familiar. It was the 23rd of October, 7 years ago, almost to the day. The same date Arthur Vance had disappeared. The old reports suddenly felt alive. The dim light seemed to flicker. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken truths. A terrible, gut-wrenching confirmation settled deep within her. The faint, metallic tang of old paper lingered on Eleanor's fingertips as she carefully reread the last of the decoded messages. A single date, etched into her memory, echoed through her mind. October 27th. That was the day Arthur had vanished, the day her world had fractured into a million sharp pieces. The reports themselves spoke of shipping manifests and obscure financial transactions. But the patterns within the code pointed to something far more sinister. Something that hummed beneath the surface of Silas Thorne's legitimate enterprises. Her uncle's tarnished watch, resting on her nightstand, seemed to pulse with a silent accusation each evening. She clutched the pen recorder, its smooth casing a familiar weight in her palm, and wondered if she was truly ready for the darkness these codes promised to unveil. Days bled into weeks, each one a delicate dance of deception and observation. Eleanor moved through the Thorne estate offices with a practiced grace, her mousy brown hair pulled back severely, her sharp blue eyes absorbing every detail. She answered phones, scheduled meetings, and typed reports, all while her mind meticulously cataloged Silas Thorne's routines, his habits, the subtle tells in his voice. She was a ghost in his machine, silently gathering information. The weight of her mission pressed down on her, a constant, heavy cloak, yet she found herself increasingly drawn into the intricate web of Silas's world, a world far more complex than she had ever imagined. One late afternoon, the office was quiet, bathed in the muted glow of the setting sun. Eleanor had stayed behind, ostensibly to finish a pressing report. Silas, too, remained, lost in thought by the tall windows of his private office. A faint scent of expensive cedarwood and his familiar cologne drifted into her space. She watched him through the open doorway, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. He stood perfectly still, his imposing frame silhouetted against the amber light, his dark eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the estate walls. There was a rare vulnerability in his posture, a slumping of the shoulders, a weariness that momentarily stripped away his usual dangerous calm. It was a fleeting glimpse, a crack in the formidable facade, and it caught Eleanor by surprise. A deep sigh escaped his lips, a sound so unexpected it made Eleanor's breath hitch. It was not a sound of frustration or anger, but of profound, almost aching solitude. Her heart gave an involuntary lurch. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the empty chairs, the polished desk, the quiet order she had brought to his chaotic domain. His eyes, usually so piercing, held a distant, melancholic quality. He seemed not to see her, but rather to look through her into some private, sorrowful landscape. Eleanor felt a strange, unsettling empathy stir within her. This man, the architect of her grief, the target of her vengeance, appeared for a single raw moment, utterly human. He spoke then, his voice a low murmur, almost to himself. Sometimes the quiet is the loudest thing of all. Eleanor froze, uncertain how to respond, or if he even expected one. The air in the office felt thick, heavy with unspoken things. She could taste the dry dust motes dancing in the last rays of sunlight. The sound of her own breathing seemed amplified in the sudden stillness. It was a stark contrast to the usual tension that filled the space when Silas was near. This was something different, something that chipped away at her carefully constructed image of him as a one-dimensional villain. She had imagined him as ruthless, cold, unfeeling, yet, in that moment, he seemed to carry a burden as heavy as her own. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that seemed to speak of profound exhaustion. "You work late, Eleanor." His voice was still soft, lacking its usual sharp edge. He glanced at her then, his gaze settling on her for a moment longer than usual, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Dedication is a rare thing." She managed a small, almost imperceptible nod, her throat suddenly dry. "Just finishing up, Mr. Thorne." Her voice sounded thin, leaking into her own ears. The sudden warmth of his unexpected observation, combined with the earlier glimpse of his vulnerability, sent a strange heat through her veins. It was a confusing, unwelcome sensation. She hated that she felt it, hated that this man, who had taken so much from her, could evoke anything but loathing. He simply nodded, then turned back to the window, the moment of shared, unspoken intimacy dissolving as quickly as it had appeared. The formidable mask slid back into place, but Eleanor was left with a disquieting truth. Silas Thorne was not merely a monster, he was a complex, shadowed figure, and this realization made her mission infinitely more complicated and far more dangerous. Her heart beat a confusing rhythm against her ribs, a drum against the silence. Later that week, Eleanor found herself at the Obsidian Club. Her presence there was a calculated risk, a foray into Silas's nocturnal world. She had followed a subtle hint, a half-heard conversation about a weekly gathering. The club pulsed with a muted energy, a low thrum of hushed conversations and the clinking of ice in crystal glasses. The air was thick with the scent of fine liquor, expensive cigars, and a hint of something floral, perhaps from the exotic flowers adorning the velvet-draped tables. She chose a secluded booth, a dark corner where she could observe without being too obvious. The soft music, a melancholic jazz, seemed to wrap around her, muffling the edges of her anxiety. She nursed a glass of sparkling water, her gaze sweeping across the opulent room. Every face seemed to hold a secret, every smile a potential deception. She saw Marcus Blackwood by the bar, his sharp features etched in the dim light, his eyes perpetually assessing the room. She felt a prickle of unease. He was a constant, watchful presence, a silent guardian of Silas Thorne's domain. Eleanor adjusted her grip on the glass, its coldness a small comfort against the warmth of her hand. Her mission felt fragile here, exposed. Then she saw him. Silas Thorne stood by the grand fireplace, a glass in his hand, engaged in conversation with a group of impeccably dressed men. He exuded an effortless authority, his dark suit blending seamlessly with the club's luxurious shadows. A shiver traced its way down Eleanor's spine, a curious mix of fear and an undeniable, unwelcome pull. She tried to avert her gaze, to focus on something else, anything else, but her eyes, as if compelled by an invisible force, returned to him. Just as her eyes found his, Silas Thorne paused in his conversation. His head lifted, his dark, piercing eyes sweeping across the crowded room, a habitual gesture of assessment and control. For a split second, his gaze locked with hers. The world seemed to narrow, the low hum of conversation, the clinking glasses, the jazz music, all faded into a distant murmur. There was only the silent, charged connection between them. It was a recognition, sharp and instantaneous, that transcended the noise in the distance. Eleanor felt a sudden, heart-stopping tremor. His eyes were like twin magnets, drawing her in, holding her captive. In that prolonged moment, she felt completely exposed, as if he could see past her carefully constructed facade, past the mousy secretary, into the fierce, vengeful woman beneath. It was a gaze that promised both danger and an unsettling, profound understanding. Her breath hitched in her chest. She could feel the rapid pulse in her wrists, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness of the moment. A wave of heat flooded her face, and she quickly dropped her gaze, pretending to examine the condensation on her glass. She felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and terror. It was not a look of accusation, not of suspicion, but something far more potent, something that spoke of an unexpected, undeniable connection. The air around her felt suddenly thin, difficult to breathe. She wished she could melt into the velvet seat, disappear into the shadows. The memory of his vulnerable sigh in the office returned, adding another layer of confusion to her already tumultuous emotions. How could someone so dangerous, so central to her pain, evoke such complicated feelings? She risked another glance, but his attention had already returned to the men around him, his expression once again unreadable, composed. The spell was broken, but the lingering sensation, the electric echo of his gaze remained, a persistent hum beneath her skin. She knew with a certainty that chilled her that he had seen her, truly seen her, and the thought both terrified and strangely thrilled her. This was no longer just a mission of vengeance. It was becoming a dangerous, unpredictable dance. The coded messages from the old business reports had been gnawing at Eleanor. Her diligent cross-referencing revealed repeated references to a specific server farm, a location tucked away in a rarely used section of the estate's sprawling basement. It was a place where information, the true currency of Silas Thorne's empire, was likely stored. The thought of finding something concrete, something undeniable, propelled her forward. This was her chance, a direct path to the evidence she desperately needed. The risk was immense, but the potential reward, the truth about Arthur, outweighed her fear. She waited for a night when the estate was particularly quiet, a Tuesday, when Silas was reportedly out of town for a late dinner meeting. The security systems were formidable, but she had spent weeks observing the patterns of the night guards, noting the blind spots in their patrols. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she slipped through the darkened corridors, the scent of dust and old wood heavy in the air. The faint creak of her shoes on the polished floorboards seemed deafening in the silence. Each shadow felt like a lurking threat, each distant sound a sign of discovery. The basement was a labyrinth of echoing concrete and forgotten storage rooms. The air grew colder, carrying a metallic scent and the faint, persistent hum of distant machinery. She moved with a silent purpose, her small flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The server room door, a reinforced steel panel, loomed before her. It was locked, of course, but her weeks of preparation included studying the estate's electronic locks. She produced a small, sophisticated device, its sleek metal cool against her gloved fingers. Her breath plumed in the cold air. Concentration narrowed her world to the small screen on her device, the rapidly scrolling lines of code, the subtle clicks as she bypassed the security protocols. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The hum of the distant servers grew louder, a low thrum that vibrated through the floor. She could taste the dry fear on her tongue. The silence around her was broken only by the rhythmic beat of her own heart, a frantic drum against her ribs. Just as the final click signaled success, a faint, rhythmic thud echoed from the corridor outside. Heavy, purposeful footsteps. Marcus Blackwood. A wave of icy panic washed over Eleanor. He wasn't supposed to be here. Silas was supposed to be gone. Her carefully constructed window of opportunity had slammed shut. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of desperate possibilities. She had seconds, maybe less. She yanked the door open, slipped inside, and slammed it shut with a muffled thud, praying the sound hadn't carried. The server room was a chilly, sterile environment, filled with rows of humming machines, their indicator lights blinking like 1,000 watchful eyes. The faint smell of ozone and hot electronics filled her nostrils. She could feel the vibration of the servers through the floor beneath her feet. The footsteps were closer now, growing louder, more distinct. Her heart beat a frantic tattoo against her ribs, a bird trapped in a cage. Eleanor scrambled, desperate to find a hiding place. Her eyes darted around the cavernous room. A stack of large, unlabeled cardboard boxes stood against the far wall, casting a deep shadow. It was her only chance. She darted towards them, squeezing herself into the narrow space between the dusty boxes and the cold concrete wall. She pulled a loose flap of cardboard partially across her, attempting to conceal herself, barely daring to breathe. The rough cardboard scraped against her cheek, but she barely noticed the sensation. The footsteps stopped directly outside the server room door. Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut, her body rigid with terror. She could hear the distinct sound of a key card sliding into the reader, followed by the familiar click of the lock disengaging. He was coming in. She pressed herself tighter against the wall, trying to disappear, to become one with the shadows. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of Marcus Blackwood's familiar, earthy cologne. The door creaked open. Eleanor heard the soft scuff of his expensive shoes on the linoleum floor, the measured rhythm of his breathing. He was inside. Her entire being screamed with a silent, primal fear. She could feel the heat radiating from the server racks, but a cold sweat slicked her skin. Every muscle in her body was tensed, ready to spring or to collapse. She heard him move further into the room, his footsteps echoing between the rows of machines. He was checking something, performing some routine inspection. Every second felt like an eternity. She could almost feel his gaze sweeping over the room, searching, assessing. The thought of being discovered, of her mission ending in this cold, sterile room, filled her with a profound, aching despair. Arthur's face flashed before her eyes. Then the footsteps began to recede. Slowly, deliberately, they moved back towards the door. Eleanor held her breath, not daring to believe her luck. The scuffing sound grew fainter, the air around her slowly clearing of Marcus Blackwood's oppressive presence. She heard the soft click of the door closing, then the distant sound of his footsteps fading down the corridor. She was safe. She had narrowly avoided detection. A wave of shaky relief washed over her, leaving her weak and trembling. Eleanor slowly, cautiously, peeked out from behind the stack of boxes. The server room was empty again, save for the ceaseless hum of the machines and the blinking lights. She let out a long, shuddering breath, her chest aching from holding it in. Her hands were clammy, her heart still pounding like a drum against her ribs. She slowly pushed herself upright, her legs feeling like jelly. The crisis had passed. She had escaped. A silent shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom of the server room. A subtle scent of expensive cedar wood and his familiar cologne filled the space. Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat as she spun around, her eyes widening in disbelief in a fresh wave of terror. Silas Thorne stood silently beside her, so close she could feel the faint current of air displaced by his presence. He was utterly still, his dark eyes fixed on hers, unnervingly calm. The unnerving calm of Silas Thorne's gaze had followed Eleanor long after she left the server room. It was not anger or curiosity she saw in his dark eyes, but something far more unsettling, an almost preternatural awareness that had made her blood run cold. She had felt exposed, caught in the beam of a silent, powerful searchlight. The image of him, unmoving in the dim light, haunted her sleep that night and clung to the edges of her thoughts the next day. It was a chilling reminder of how effortlessly he could appear, how little she truly understood the full extent of his reach. Back in the sterile quiet of her apartment, the memory of Silas's unnerving presence fueled her late-night work. The coded messages hidden within old business reports had become an obsession. She spread them out across her small dining table, the overhead light casting a harsh glare on the papers. The air in the room felt heavy, stale with the scent of old paper and the faint, bitter aroma of the black coffee she had brewed hours ago. Eleanor ran a hand through her hair, pulling at the roots in frustration, her fingers stiff from hours of tracing symbols and cross-referencing dates. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her body, a constant companion since she had stepped into this dangerous world. She had been at this for 3 nights, her eyes burning, her mind racing. The initial breakthrough had been agonizingly slow, a painstaking process of elimination and pattern recognition. She remembered Arthur's patience with puzzles, his quiet focus. A pang of longing shot through her, a familiar ache in her chest. She missed the simple comfort of his presence, the way his laughter used to fill a room. Now all that remained was this cold, intricate game. Then a flicker of understanding. A repeated sequence of numbers, seemingly random, began to align with a specific set of financial transactions she had previously dismissed as anomalous. Her breath caught in her throat. The cold glow of her laptop screen reflected in her wide blue eyes, highlighting the dark circles beneath them. It was a language disguised within the mundane, hinting at something far more sinister than simple money laundering. The next sequence, a string of seemingly innocuous city codes and dates, clicked into place with a sudden, horrifying clarity. It was not merely local dealings, but an expansive network. The names, once just blurred entities in the reports, now began to take on a terrifying shape. They pointed to connections across several states, implicating Silas in a much larger, more dangerous criminal enterprise than she had ever imagined. This was not just about illicit goods or controlled substances. It was about influence, about power, about a web woven so deep into the fabric of the underworld that it seemed impossible to untangle. Her fingers locked around the warm ceramic mug, the heat a small anchor in the sudden storm of dread. If she let go, she knew she might spill the dark liquid, her hands trembling with the weight of the revelation. Her initial belief that Arthur had been caught in a localized dispute shattered into 1,000 pieces. He had stumbled into something colossal, a leviathan of corruption and violence. The sheer scale of it made her feel impossibly small, a tiny moth fluttering around a roaring inferno. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, leaving a cold track on her skin. It was not for herself, but for Arthur, for the innocent man caught in this monstrous machinery. The bitter taste of coffee in her mouth mingled with the salt of her tears. The realization settled in her gut like a block of ice. Silas Thorne was not just a powerful crime boss. He was a kingpin, a silent architect of chaos on a terrifying scale. This changed everything. Her mission, once a clear path to justice, now felt like a desperate dive into an abyss. The evidence she sought would not merely expose him, it would shake the very foundations of this hidden world. And if she failed, if she were discovered, the consequences would be far more dire than simple exposure. Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of her apartment. The following morning, a new resolve hardened her expression. She moved with a purpose, a focused intensity that bordered on recklessness. The air in the Thorne Estate office felt charged, each polished surface reflecting a silent threat. She knew she had to act decisively. The pen recorder, her silent witness, had to be deployed. Eleanor waited for her chance with a coiled tension in her shoulders. Silas had a recurring morning meeting with his inner circle, a ritual that lasted precisely 90 minutes, leaving his private office momentarily unguarded. The scent of his expensive cologne, a mix of cedar and something vaguely metallic, still lingered in the air around his empty desk. The heavy oak door was always left slightly ajar when he was out, a subtle invitation, or perhaps a deliberate test. Her internal clock ticked with agonizing slowness. She watched Marcus Blackwood head down the corridor. His usual watchful presence temporarily diverted. Her breath hitched in her throat, a dry constriction that made it difficult to swallow. This was it. She walked casually to Silas's private office, a stack of files clutched in her hand. Her movements were precise, practiced, almost robotic. Her mind raced, cataloging every detail, every potential pitfall. Were there hidden cameras she had missed? Was Marcus really gone, or just out of sight? The pervasive sense of surveillance in this place was a constant, chilling companion. The polished mahogany of the desk gleamed under the soft office lights, reflecting her anxious face. She paused at the doorway, feigning a moment of hesitation, as if considering whether to enter. The silence of the room was profound, broken only by the faint hum of the building's air conditioning. She stepped inside, her shoes making no sound on the thick Persian rug. The weight of the pen recorder in her pocket felt immense, a tiny, fragile weapon against a formidable adversary. Her target was the ornate, antique globe that stood beside Silas's expansive desk. It was heavy, stable, and its deep, dark wood offered ample shadow. More importantly, it was positioned perfectly to capture audio from the desk, from the leather armchairs where visitors often sat, and from the adjacent sitting area. Her hands, usually steady, now trembled with a fine tremor she struggled to control. She placed the files on the corner of the desk, a natural-looking action. As she did, her fingers brushed against the cool, smooth surface of the globe. With a swift, practiced motion, she extracted the pen recorder. The slight click as she pressed it into place felt deafening in the silence. It slid into a narrow crevice between two of the globe's metal bands, almost invisible, yet perfectly positioned. The small red indicator light, barely larger than a pinprick, was now concealed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird desperate to escape its cage. She pulled her hand back, her skin tingling, and took a deep, shaky breath. The scent of Silas's cologne seemed to intensify, wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. It was done. The proof was planted. Now the waiting began. She walked out of the office with the same fainted casualness, her body rigid with suppressed tension. The hallway seemed longer, the air thicker. Every shadow felt like a watchful eye. She desperately wanted to rush, to run, but forced herself to maintain a measured pace. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the empty files. She needed to breathe, truly breathe, but the air felt thin and unyielding. Later that afternoon, a cold knot formed in her stomach when she encountered Marcus Blackwood. She was returning from the break room, a steaming cup of herbal tea in her hand, trying to calm the lingering adrenaline. The scent of the tea, usually comforting, now seemed weak against the pervasive tension. He stood by the water cooler, talking to another associate, a burly man named David. As Eleanor approached, Marcus's eyes, perpetually assessing, fixed on her. The casual conversation between the two men ceased. A subtle shift in the air, a drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "New faces always have something to prove," Marcus said, his voice low and deliberate. Not quite a question, not quite a statement. His gaze lingered on Eleanor, sharp and unblinking, like a watchful predator. There was a knowing smirk playing on the corners of his lips, a subtle curve that sent a shiver down her spine. The words themselves were innocuous enough, a common office cliché, but the weight he put behind them, the way his eyes seemed to strip away her carefully constructed facade, made them a direct challenge. Eleanor felt a sudden tightness in her chest, a prickle of fear spreading through her veins. Her grip tightened on her mug. She had to respond, had to maintain the illusion of an unassuming, diligent secretary. "I suppose that's true, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, her voice steady, carefully modulated. She managed a small, polite smile, hoping it didn't betray the frantic pounding of her heart. The tea, usually a soothing warmth, now felt like a scalding accusation in her hands. Marcus simply nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. It was a prolonged stare, an uncomfortable silence that stretched for several beats too long. He was dissecting her, searching for any tell, any flicker of uncertainty. The artificial light of the hallway seemed to press down on her, exposing every detail. Eleanor felt the tremor in her hands grow more pronounced, a barely perceptible wobble that she hoped he wouldn't notice. The dry taste in her mouth was almost unbearable. "Just remember," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, "sometimes what you think you prove isn't what others see." His gaze sharpened, a flicker of something cold and calculating passing through his dark eyes. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the intensity faded, replaced by his usual impassive expression. He turned back to David, resuming their conversation as if nothing had happened. But for Eleanor, everything had happened. The encounter left her shaken, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. He was not just observing her, he was actively suspicious. The suspicion was a palpable force, a weight pressing down on her, threatening to crack her carefully built shell. She walked away, her mind racing, replaying every word, every subtle nuance of his expression. Had she given herself away? Had he seen something in her eyes, in her posture? The walls were closing in faster than she had anticipated. As the day drew to a close, a heavy sense of dread settled over her. She gathered her things, the small office feeling stifling. The distant hum of office machinery, usually a background drone, now seemed to throb with an ominous rhythm. She knew she was being watched, not just by Silas, but by his entire network. She stepped into the main corridor, ready to make her escape for the day, to retreat to the relative safety of her apartment. Her hand was on the cold doorknob when she heard it. Voices, hushed but clear, drifting from Silas's office. The very room where she had planted her silent witness. The new secretary, Marcus Blackwood's voice. It was unmistakable, low and gravelly. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The racing of her pulse quickened, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden tightness in her chest. Another voice, deeper, unfamiliar, responded with a question, too soft for Eleanor to discern the words. Then Marcus again, his tone laced with thinly veiled skepticism. She's too quiet, and those eyes, they see too much. The polished surface of the mahogany desk reflected the last slivers of afternoon light, a cold, unyielding gleam that mirrored Eleanor's own growing despair. Each day blurred into the next, a relentless cycle of meticulous effort yielding frustratingly little. She had pored over ledgers until her eyes burned, cross-referenced schedules, and even sifted through Silas Thorne's archived emails, finding nothing but perfectly constructed legality. The supposed inconsistencies in financial records, once promising, had dissolved into complex but legitimate transactions upon closer inspection. Every avenue she pursued seemed to lead to a dead end, a meticulously hidden wall of impenetrable corporate bureaucracy. Her fingers, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she sorted a stack of innocuous correspondence. The thrill of infiltration, the sharp edge of danger that had once fueled her, now felt like a dull, persistent ache behind her eyes. 2 weeks into her mission, and the most incriminating thing she had found was a faint stain on an old coffee mug in the break room. She imagined Arthur's face, etched with worry, a memory that pricked at her resolve. How could she avenge him if she could not even find a single crack in this man's formidable fortress? The weight of his tarnished watch, usually a comfort in her pocket, now felt heavy, a burden she might never lift. She glanced toward the corner where the concealed pen recorder lay hidden, an ordinary object containing her desperate hope. It had captured hours of Silas's low, resonant voice, his calm commands, his clipped conversations. Yet every playback revealed only the mundane operations of a powerful, legitimate business. There were hints, whispers, a chilling undertone in Marcus Blackwood's watchful gaze, but nothing concrete, nothing that would shatter Silas Thorne's carefully constructed empire. The thought of Marcus, his eyes always assessing, sent a shiver through her. He had seen too much. He knew something was amiss. Eleanor pressed her palms against her temples, trying to quiet the buzzing frustration that had been building for days. She needed a moment, a breath away from the oppressive silence of the office, but there was nowhere to go. This gilded cage was her entire world now. She pushed back from her desk, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only sound breaking the stillness. Her gaze drifted to the tall, arched window that overlooked the sprawling, manicured gardens of the estate. The glass was like a dark mirror, reflecting her own weary image back at her. Her hair, usually pulled back so severely, had escaped its bun in stray strands around her face. Her blue eyes, once sharp with purpose, now held a deep weariness. She looked thinner, almost fragile, a far cry from the determined woman who had walked into this office weeks ago. The deception was eating at her, gnawing at her soul, piece by agonizing piece. She stared at the reflection, seeing not just herself, but the ghost of Arthur Vance in her features, his kindness, his trust, his unwitting vulnerability. "What am I doing, Arthur?" she whispered, the words barely audible against the hum of the ventilation. Her reflection offered no answers, only a haunted gaze. She reached out, her fingers pressing against the cool glass, as if trying to grasp a fleeting image. "This is impossible. He's too clever, too careful." A bitter laugh escaped her, a sound devoid of humor. He plays games, Arthur. He watches, he tests. He makes you think he trusts you, but it's all a charade, a performance. She thought of the faded photograph of the unknown woman Silas had asked her to find, a task so personal, so out of place. Was that another test? Another way to gauge her reaction, to see if she would bend to his will? Or was it a genuine crack in his facade, a moment of unexpected humanity she had been too quick to dismiss? The thought gnawed at her, adding another layer to the complex tapestry of her doubt. "He makes you question everything," she murmured, her voice growing stronger, a low thrum of anger rising within her. "He looks at you with those eyes, so calm, so knowing, and you almost believe him. You almost believe there's something real there, some depth beyond the monster you know him to be." She remembered the charged moment at the Obsidian Club, their eyes locking across the crowded room, a silent current passing between them that had left her breathless and confused. It was a dangerous feeling, an intimacy she could not afford. "But it's a lie, isn't it?" she continued, her breath fogging the glass in front of her. "It has to be. He's a manipulator, a master of deceit. He knows how to pull you in, how to make you drop your guard, only to crush you the moment you're vulnerable." The image of Silas Thorne, impeccably dressed, his dark eyes piercing, flashed in her mind. He was a predator, always observing, always calculating. Her frustration coiled tighter, a hot, burning knot in her chest. She had come here for truth, for justice, for vengeance. But all she had found was a labyrinth of shadows and a growing sense of her own inadequacy. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the walls of this opulent office were closing in around her, suffocating her with their silence and secrets. "He talks about loyalty, about trust," Eleanor said, her voice laced with disdain. "But he doesn't know the meaning of it. He's a hypocrite, a killer who hides behind tailored suits and polite smiles." Her voice cracked with emotion, the raw pain of her grief finally breaking through her carefully constructed composure. She saw Arthur's kind face again, the silver streak in his hair, the weariness in his eyes just before he disappeared forever. The image was a fresh wound. "He took you from me, Arthur," she whispered, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "He took everything, and he acts like he's above it all, like he's some kind of king dictating lives and deaths with a wave of his hand." Her fingers clenched into fists, pressing harder against the cold glass. "But he's not. He's a murderer, a coward who orchestrates destruction from the shadows." A single tear traced a hot path down her cheek, a betrayal of her stoicism. "And he wants me to believe he's just a businessman, a man who knows nothing of your fate." Her voice rose, edged with a bitter, desperate conviction. "But I know the truth, don't I? I know he planned it. He orchestrated every single step. He signed your death warrant, Silas Thorne." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw, a confession spoken not to her reflection, but to the empty office, to the ghost of her uncle, to the unyielding walls that held her captive. A sudden, chilling silence fell then, not just the usual quiet of the estate, but a deeper, more profound stillness that seemed to swallow all sound. Eleanor felt a subtle shift in the air, a faint disturbance in the carefully controlled atmosphere of the room. Her breath hitched. A distinct scent, one she had come to associate with power and danger, yet also with a strange, unsettling allure, began to fill her senses. It was the rich, earthy aroma of Silas Thorne's expensive cologne, suddenly heavy in the air behind her. The polished surface of the mahogany desk reflected the last slivers of afternoon light, a cold, unyielding gleam that mirrored Eleanor's own growing despair. Each day blurred into the next, a relentless cycle of meticulous effort yielding frustratingly little. She had pored over ledgers until her eyes burned, cross-referenced schedules, and even sifted through Silas Thorne's archived emails, finding nothing but perfectly constructed legality. The supposed inconsistencies in financial records, once promising, had dissolved into complex but legitimate transactions upon closer inspection. Every avenue she pursued seemed to lead to a dead end, a meticulously hidden wall of impenetrable corporate bureaucracy. Her fingers, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she sorted a stack of innocuous correspondence. The thrill of infiltration, the sharp edge of danger that had once fueled her, now felt like a dull, persistent ache behind her eyes. 2 weeks into her mission, and the most incriminating thing she had found was a faint stain on an old coffee mug in the break room. She imagined Arthur's face, etched with worry, a memory that pricked at her resolve. How could she avenge him if she could not even find a single crack in this man's formidable fortress? The weight of his tarnished watch, usually a comfort in her pocket, now felt heavy, a burden she might never lift. She glanced towards the corner where the concealed pen recorder lay hidden, an ordinary object containing her desperate hope. It had captured hours of Silas's low, resonant voice, his calm commands, his clipped conversations. Yet every playback revealed only the mundane operations of a powerful, legitimate business. There were hints, whispers, a chilling undertone in Marcus Blackwood's watchful gaze, but nothing concrete, nothing that would shatter Silas Thorne's carefully constructed empire. The thought of Marcus, his eyes always assessing, sent a shiver through her. He had seen too much. He knew something was amiss. Eleanor pressed her palms against her temples, trying to quiet the buzzing frustration that had been building for days. She needed a moment, a breath away from the oppressive silence of the office, but there was nowhere to go. This gilded cage was her entire world now. She pushed back from her desk, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only sound breaking the stillness. Her gaze drifted to the tall, arched window that overlooked the sprawling, manicured gardens of the estate. The glass was like a dark mirror, reflecting her own weary image back at her. Her hair, usually pulled back so severely, had escaped its bun in stray strands around her face. Her blue eyes, once sharp with purpose, now held a deep weariness. She looked thinner, almost fragile, a far cry from the determined woman who had walked into this office weeks ago. The deception was eating at her, gnawing at her soul piece by agonizing piece. She stared at the reflection, seeing not just herself but the ghost of Arthur Vance in her features, his kindness, his trust, his unwitting vulnerability. "What am I doing, Arthur?" she whispered, the words barely audible against the hum of the ventilation. Her reflection offered no answers, only a haunted gaze. She reached out, her fingers pressing against the cool glass, as if trying to grasp a fleeting image. "This is impossible. He's too clever, too careful." A bitter laugh escaped her, a sound devoid of humor. "He plays games, Arthur. He watches. He tests. He makes you think he trusts you, but it's all a charade, a performance." She thought of the faded photograph of the unknown woman Silas had asked her to find, a task so personal, so out of place. Was that another test? Another way to gauge her reaction, to see if she would bend to his will? Or was it a genuine crack in his facade, a moment of unexpected humanity she had been too quick to dismiss? The thought gnawed at her, adding another layer to the complex tapestry of her doubt. "He makes you question everything," she murmured, her voice growing stronger, a low thrum of anger rising within her. "He looks at you with those eyes, so calm, so knowing, and you almost believe him. You almost believe there's something real there, some depth beyond the monster you know him to be." She remembered the charged moment at the Obsidian Club, their eyes locking across the crowded room, a silent current passing between them that had left her breathless and confused. It was a dangerous feeling, an intimacy she could not afford. "But it's a lie, isn't it?" she continued, her breath fogging in the glass in front of her room. "It has to be. He's a manipulator, a master of a deceit. He knows how to pull you in, how to make you drop your guard, only to crush you the moment you're vulnerable." The image of Silas Thorne, impeccably dressed, his dark eyes piercing, flashed in her mind. He was a predator, always observing, always calculating. Her frustration coiled tighter, a hot, burning knot in her chest. She had come here for truth, for justice, for vengeance. But all she had found was a labyrinth of shadows and a growing sense of her own inadequacy. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the walls of this opulent office were closing in around her, suffocating her with their silence and secrets. "He talks about loyalty, about trust," Eleanor said, her voice laced with disdain. "But he doesn't know the meaning of it. He's a hypocrite, a killer who hides behind tailored suits and polite smiles." Her voice cracked with emotion. the raw pain of her grief finally breaking through her carefully constructed composure. She saw Arthur's kind face again, the silver streak in his hair, the weariness in his eyes, just before he disappeared forever. The image was a fresh wound. "He took you from me, Arthur," she whispered, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "He took everything, and he acts like he's above it all, like he's some kind of king, dictating lives and deaths with a wave of his hand." Her fingers clenched into fists, pressing harder against the cold glass. "But he's not. He's a murderer, a coward who orchestrates destruction from the shadows." A single tear traced a hot path down her cheek, a betrayal of her stoicism. "And he wants me to believe he's just a businessman, a man who knows nothing of your fate." Her voice rose, edged with a bitter, desperate conviction. "But I know the truth, don't I? I know he planned it. He orchestrated every single step. He signed your death warrant, Silas Thorne." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw, a confession spoken not to her reflection, but to the empty office, to the ghost of her uncle, to the unyielding walls that held her captive. A sudden, chilling silence fell then, not just the usual quiet of the estate, but a deeper, more profound stillness that seemed to swallow all sound. Eleanor felt a subtle shift in the air, a faint disturbance in the carefully controlled atmosphere of the room. Her breath hitched. A distinct scent, one she had come to associate with power and danger, yet also with a strange, unsettling allure, began to fill her senses. It was the rich, earthy aroma of Silas Thorne's expensive cologne, suddenly heavy in the air behind her. The faint, familiar scent of expensive cologne, dark and musky, clung to the air like an unwelcome shadow. Eleanor felt it before she registered anything else, a cold prickle on her skin that raced down her spine. Her own words, those desperate, angry accusations against Silas Thorne, still vibrated in the silent office. She had been talking to herself, or rather, to her reflection in the glass, believing herself entirely alone in the quiet space. The silence that followed her final bitter declaration was not the gentle quiet of an empty room, but a heavy, deliberate cessation of all sound, as if the very air had stopped breathing. Her blood turned to ice in her bones. Her breath hitched, catching painfully in her throat. Every nerve ending screamed at her, a primal warning she had learned to trust in the dangerous world she now inhabited. She squeezed her eyes shut for a fleeting moment, a futile attempt to deny the impossible, to rewind time, to erase the damning words that had just left her lips. When she opened them again, her reflection in the glass showed only one terrified, blue-black eyes staring back. Eleanor forced herself to move, a slow, agonizing pivot that felt like wading through thick, cold treacle. Each centimeter of her turn brought with it a fresh wave of dread, a sickening certainty of what she would find. Her muscles protested, stiff with fear, yet she compelled them forward, needing to face this terrifying reality. Her hands, which had been gripping the edge of her desk with white-knuckled intensity, now trembled visibly, the knuckles stark white against her pale skin. She could hear the frantic beat of her own heart, a thunderous drum against her ribs, echoing in her ears. Then he was there. Silas Thorne stood directly behind her as if he had materialized from the very shadows of the opulent office. His presence was a solid, undeniable mass, an immovable object that now blocked her path, her escape, her very breath. He was closer than she could have imagined, closer than anyone should be without being heard. The distinct scent of his cologne was now overpowering, a suffocating cloud that enveloped her. His face was a mask of perfect impassivity, devoid of any discernible emotion. No anger flashed in his dark, piercing eyes. No surprise creased his sharp jawline. There was only a profound, unsettling stillness, a terrifying blankness that revealed nothing and yet promised everything. It was the face of a man who held all the cards, a predator who had merely observed his prey's final, fatal blunder. Eleanor's gaze, despite her terror, was drawn to his eyes. They were no longer merely observant, as they had been in the first weeks of her infiltration, those watchful, assessing glances that seemed to weigh her worth. Now they were colder, sharper, more analytical. They pierced through her carefully constructed facade, stripping away her composure, her pretense of a meek, efficient secretary. His gaze felt like a surgeon's scalpel, dissecting her very soul, laying bare her intentions, her fears, her every hidden thought. She felt utterly exposed, vulnerable, as if her skin had been peeled back to reveal the raw, trembling flesh beneath. The atmosphere in the office, which had minutes ago felt like her private confessional, now shifted dramatically. It became charged, heavy with unspoken tension, a palpable sense of danger that thrummed in the air around them. The rich, dark wood panels of the walls seemed to press in, the expensive leather furniture felt like restraints, and the polished brass gleamed with a malevolent light. The entire room, once a symbol of Silas's power, now felt like a cage, and she was trapped inside it with the keeper. Eleanor struggled to breathe, her lungs refusing to expand fully. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead, and she could feel it trickling down her temples. She tried to speak, to offer some explanation, some desperate denial, but her mouth was dry, her tongue thick and useless. No sound emerged, only a small, pathetic gasp that was lost in the oppressive silence. Silas remained motionless, his eyes locked onto hers, reading her like an open book. He didn't need to move, didn't need to speak. His sheer presence was enough. His unwavering stare was a silent interrogation, demanding answers she could not give, confirming fears she could not voice. She wondered how long he had been standing there, how many of her desperate, angry words he had heard. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through her. Had he heard everything? Had he heard her name her uncle, Arthur? The question was a burning coal in her mind. A tiny, almost imperceptible muscle twitched in Silas's jaw, the only sign of life on his otherwise unreadable face. It was a fleeting movement, yet Eleanor, in her heightened state of terror, registered it, amplifying its significance into a silent, terrifying judgment. He knew. He knew everything, or enough. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, stealing what little air remained in her lungs. Her carefully laid plans, her meticulous preparations, her years of dedication to this mission, all of it seemed to crumble into dust around her. Her mind raced, a frantic, desperate search for an escape route, a lie, a way to salvage what was left. But there was nothing. The truth in all its terrifying clarity was now laid bare between them. The game, which had been subtle and calculating, had just taken a brutally direct and personal turn. It was no longer a matter of gathering evidence from the shadows. It was a confrontation, stark and unavoidable. A sudden, sharp memory flashed through Eleanor's mind. Arthur Vance, her uncle, his kind face etched with worry, his hand clasping hers. "Be careful, Elle," he had said, his voice gentle but firm. "Some shadows, once disturbed, can never be put back." The memory was a bitter echo of the danger she now faced, a confirmation of his unspoken fears for her, a warning she had heedlessly ignored in her single-minded pursuit of justice. The thought of him, of his honest, unsuspecting nature, brought a fresh wave of grief and fierce resolve that momentarily pushed back the fear. She would not let his death be in vain. Silas finally moved, a slow, deliberate step that brought him even closer. The polished floorboards under his expensive leather shoes made no sound. He reached out a hand, not to touch her, but to rest his palm on the edge of her desk, right where her trembling fingers had been moments before. The gesture was possessive, territorial, a silent claim over the space over her. His fingers, long and strong, contrasted sharply with the smooth, cold wood. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floor. It was calm, deceptively so, a voice that held immense power without needing to raise its volume. There was no accusation in his tone, no anger, only a profound, unsettling knowledge. The sound of her name spoken by him in this moment was more chilling than any shouted threat. It was a sentence delivered with quiet finality. She swallowed hard, her throat still painfully constricted. She managed a weak, almost inaudible, "Sir." It was the only word she could force out, a desperate plea for time, for understanding, for anything that might offer a reprieve. Her eyes, still wide with terror, pleaded with him, searching for any flicker of the man who had shown her glimpses of vulnerability, of complexity. But there was only the cold, analytical gaze. "You have a vivid imagination," Silas observed, his voice still unnervingly level. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, each syllable weighted with unspoken meaning and a deeply held conviction. He watched her closely, his gaze unblinking, waiting for her reaction. He was testing her, she realized, pushing her to see how she would respond, what she would reveal. Eleanor's mind screamed, "Deny it. Deny everything. Play the part." But the words refused to form. How could she deny what he had so clearly heard? How could she pretend innocence when her rage had just been so openly displayed? The truth of her mission, the depth of her hatred, had been laid bare. There was no going back, no hiding behind the meek facade any longer. A single tear, hot and defiant, escaped the corner of her eye and traced a path down her cheek. It was a betrayal of her carefully maintained composure, a physical manifestation of the raw emotion she usually kept so tightly locked away. She hated herself for it, for showing weakness, for giving him any advantage, but she couldn't stop it. The weight of her grief, her fear, and the crushing realization of her failure pressed down on her, unbearable. Silas's gaze softened infinitesimally for a fraction of a second, a fleeting flicker that might have been compassion, or perhaps just a deeper level of assessment. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same impenetrable mask. He reached into his jacket pocket with his free hand, drawing out a crisp white handkerchief. He offered it to her, his movements slow and deliberate, almost ceremonial. Eleanor stared at the handkerchief, then back at his eyes, a silent battle raging within her. To accept it would be to acknowledge her tears, to acknowledge his observation, to acknowledge the shift in their dynamic. To refuse it would be an act of defiance, perhaps a foolish one. Her hand hovered, trembling, before slowly reaching out to take the pristine linen. The fabric was soft, clean, and carried the faint scent of his cologne. It felt like a concession. She dabbed at her eyes, acutely aware of his continued, unwavering gaze. The simple act felt profoundly humiliating. She was no longer the competent, emotionless secretary. She was a broken woman, caught in a desperate lie, her vulnerability exposed for all to see. "The office has ears, Eleanor," Silas said, his voice still calm, a quiet warning. "Especially this office." His eyes flickered around the richly decorated room, as if to emphasize his point, before settling back on her. Loose words have a way of finding their owners. He knew, he truly knew. The confirmation, though delivered in a calm, almost philosophical tone, struck her with fresh terror. This was not a guess, not a suspicion. He had heard. He understood the meaning behind her words, the depth of her accusation. Her mind, despite the panic, desperately tried to reassert control. She needed to respond, to react, to salvage some shred of her mission, her dignity. She thought of Arthur, of his watch, of the promise she had made. The fire of her resolve, though momentarily dampened by fear, began to flicker back to life. She met his gaze, forcing herself to hold it, despite the tremor in her hands. I apologize, Mr. Thorne," she managed, her voice still hoarse, but with a new edge of determination. It was a moment of frustration, the pressure of the work, the long hours. She offered the first, most plausible lie that came to mind, hoping to deflect, to create an alternative narrative. It sounded hollow, even to her own ears. A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched the corner of Silas's mouth, a ghost of a smile that never reached his eyes. It was not amusement, but something colder, more calculating. "Frustration, yes," he murmured, his gaze still holding hers. "A powerful motivator, perhaps too powerful at times." He paused again, allowing the weight of his words to settle between them. "I understand the demands of this position are considerable." His words were a double-edged sword, a feigned understanding that simultaneously acknowledged her lie and hinted at a deeper, more dangerous truth. He was playing with her, she realized, toying with her desperation, enjoying the unraveling of her carefully constructed facade. The realization ignited a spark of anger within her, a rebellious fire that pushed back against the suffocating fear. She would not break. Not here, not now. "I can assure you," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining a little strength, a desperate attempt to regain control, "it will not happen again. My dedication to my duties remains absolute. She tried to project an image of steely resolve, of unwavering professionalism, despite the tremble in her hands and the racing of her heart. Silas merely nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. He took his hand from the desk, letting it drop to his side, his movements fluid and unhurried. The gesture seemed to signal the end of this silent, terrifying standoff. Eleanor braced herself, expecting a dismissal, a warning, perhaps even an accusation. Instead, he turned slowly, his back momentarily to her, and walked toward the large, heavy oak door that led to his private office. Each step was measured, deliberate, amplifying the suspense. The scent of his cologne receded slightly, but the tension in the room remained, thick and suffocating. Eleanor watched him, every muscle coiled, ready for whatever came next. He reached the door, his hand resting on the polished brass knob. He looked back over his shoulder, his dark eyes meeting hers once more. This time there was a glint in them, a spark that Eleanor couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't malice, not exactly, but something far more unsettling. A predatory intelligence, a dangerous curiosity. "Eleanor," he said, his voice still low, still calm, but now with an undeniable edge of command. "Come into my office." The words were simple, yet they resonated with an immense power, an order that allowed no refusal. It was an invitation, yes, but also a summons, a decree that sealed her fate, at least for this moment. Her heart pounded a desperate rhythm against her ribs. She knew with chilling certainty that stepping through that door meant entering a new, far more dangerous phase of her mission. The cat and mouse game was over. The confrontation had truly begun. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second, her eyes darting to the framed photograph of Arthur on her desk, a silent plea for strength, for guidance first. Then she pushed herself away from the desk, her legs feeling strangely heavy, almost numb. She walked towards the private office door, each step a conscious act of will, her gaze fixed on Silas, who watched her approach with that same unreadable intensity. She reached the threshold, her hand brushing past his as she entered the inner sanctum of his power. The air inside felt even heavier, imbued with the scent of old leather and a faint metallic tang she couldn't quite place. She turned to face him, her breath catching once more. Silas stepped through the doorway behind her. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, to the heavy oak door. With a soft, resonant click, he closed it, plunging them into a deeper, more profound silence. The sound echoed in the now enclosed space, sealing them inside together, with all the unspoken truths between them. The oak door clicked shut. The sound echoed in the opulent office. Silas Thorne's cologne hung in the air, now suffocating. Eleanor stood still, her back to Silas. Every nerve ending screamed. A shiver ran down her spine. Her world felt shattered. His unseen gaze stripped her composure. Eleanor turned slowly, her heart a frantic drum. Silas stood by his mahogany desk, hands clasped behind his back. His expression was unreadable. It showed no anger, no surprise, no recognition. This neutrality was terrifying, a calm before a storm. He watched her like a predator. His dark eyes, usually sharp, absorbed all light. "Have a seat, Eleanor," Silas said. His voice was smooth, a low rumble. It held his usual authority, but with an unnerving shift. It was a predator's purr, dangerous and compelling. She moved to the chair, her legs disconnected. Each step was an effort to seem composed. She sat, fingers locked on the armrests. Her knuckles were white. She feared she might unravel. The polished desk reflected subdued light, a deceptive tranquility. Eleanor knew this was a battleground. She had surrendered her position. Silas stayed standing, his gaze fixed. He let the silence stretch, amplifying the pounding in her ears. He was testing her, measuring her resilience. Her mind raced, searching his face for a clue. Had he heard only the last sentence or her entire confession? "There's a new acquisition," Silas finally said, breaking the quiet. He moved to his desk, picking up a dark leather folder. A small, significant shipping company out of Portland. He offered her the folder. His business words felt like code. His eyes searched hers. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she took the folder. The cool leather grounded her. "Portland," she repeated, her voice soft. She cleared her throat, regaining control. Are there specific details I need to review, Mr. Thorne? He offered a slow, cold smile that did not reach his eyes. Indeed, he said, his voice lowering, this company has a complicated history, Eleanor. Uncover any inconvenient truths, especially regarding previous owners or ties to older networks, people who prefer shadows. Her mind flashed to Arthur. Was this a test? A veiled reference to her uncle's past? Was he baiting her, watching for a reaction? Her stomach churned with fear. She opened the folder, pretending to scan the blurring text. Old paper and ink mixed with a metallic taste of fear. It's a delicate matter, Silas continued, his voice silken. It requires absolute discretion and complete loyalty. He emphasized loyalty, his gaze unwavering, boring into her soul. Eleanor's breath hitched. The warning was clear. He knew or suspected enough for this chilling challenge. She met his gaze, forcing a steady professional expression. Of course, Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice firm with a deceptive calm. Discretion is paramount. Loyalty, a given. The words tasted like ash. A phantom scar above her left eyebrow reminded her of vulnerability. Silas nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on hers. The silence returned, heavy. He walked around the desk, stopping behind her chair. Eleanor stiffened, muscles tensing. She felt his warmth, the subtle scent of his cologne. His proximity suffocated her, a manifestation of his power. Her hands gripped the armrest tighter. Her knuckles ached. Good, he murmured, close to her ear. This is just the beginning. I feel you can handle more than basic secretarial duties, Eleanor. His words held a double meaning. They were a threat and a challenge to her capacity for deception. She felt the phantom touch of his fingers on her bun, a possessive gesture. He moved away. Eleanor sighed in relief. The air felt lighter, but tension remained. For hours, Silas continued his psychological assault. Each normal-seeming task held a hidden layer, a potential trap. He asked for a report on a competitor's vulnerabilities, then casually mentioned its devastating potential in wrong hands. He gave her access codes to a secure server, then watched her type, his eyes sharp. Eleanor performed each task with meticulous care, her mind furious behind calm competence. She analyzed every instruction, searching for hidden meaning, implied threat. She maintained a neutral expression, her slight build masking a steel core. Inside, fear and defiance raged. She fought to hide her true emotions. Arthur's kind, weary face fueled her resolve. She would not break. Later, Silas presented her with a locked, impossibly heavy, dark metal briefcase. This contains the final contracts for the Portland acquisition, he explained, his voice flat, highly sensitive. Only for my eyes. Take it to the secure vault in the East Wing. Bring me the confirmation receipt. His dark eyes fixed on her. This was the ultimate test. Eleanor took the briefcase. Its weight felt like a burden, a symbol of trust or trap. She imagined the documents inside, thick with secrets, able to ruin lives. Her life hung in the balance. She must show no hesitation, no curiosity. This was a direct challenge to her loyalty, a deadly game. She walked to the East Wing, the heavy briefcase swinging. The Thorne estate corridors were quiet, marble floors reflecting muted light. Every shadow held a hidden observer, every corner a trap. She felt Marcus Blackwood's imaginary cold gaze. The air was thick with unspoken warnings. The building's hum reminded her of surveillance. Upon her return, Silas merely nodded, accepting the receipt. He did not ask about temptation. His silence was more potent than interrogation. It told her he believed he knew the answer. He was confident in reading the people. She was determined to prove him wrong. The day closed. Eleanor was back in her office, the silence a contrast to Silas's tension. Her muscles ached from maintaining her facade. Her head throbbed. She felt drained, as if battling an unseen force. Silas's cologne still lingered, a phantom reminder. She locked her office door, the familiar click a small comfort. Her hand went to her pocket for the concealed pen recorder, a familiar ritual. She pulled it out, its sleek design contrasting its hidden purpose. She meant to review the day's recordings, to listen for any missed nuance, perhaps a slip in his calm. Her thumb moved to the activation button. No click. Nothing happened. She pressed it harder. Still nothing. Unease prickled her skin. Cold dread spread. Her sharp blue eyes scanned the pen's surface. The casing seemed intact. No visible damage. Then she saw it. A minute scratch near the charging port. A hairline fracture on the minuscule lens. It was not a malfunction. It was deliberate. Her breath caught. A gasp trapped in her chest. The pen recorder was useless. Expertly disabled. A chilling realization washed over her, cold and absolute. This was Silas's message. Clearer than any threat. He knew, he had known all along. Her surveillance was detected. The game had escalated. She was exposed. The tampered pen recorder lay on Eleanor's desk. A cold accusation. Its tiny lens, once her secret eye, seemed to mock her. Silas had not just disabled it, he left it there as a clear message. Her cover was tearing apart. Marcus Blackwood's eyes lingered, a calculated knowing in their depth. This was insidious, more than suspicion. Paranoia tightened the opulent office air, making it suffocating. She had to learn how much he knew, how far his reach extended. The scent of polished leather and old money now felt like a cage. Eleanor worked late after Silas Thorne left. The office hummed with electronics, contrasting her anxious heart. She needed to access network logs to trace movements. This risk she could not ignore. Her fingers trembled while typing, keyboard clicks filling the silence. Weeks ago, she overheard Marcus discuss a new monitoring system. He called it his personal project for security. She dismissed it then as jargon, another of Silas Thorne's paranoid layers. Now cold dread settled deep inside her. The system hid within network traffic. Eleanor spent almost an hour bypassing firewalls, brow furrowed. The screen glowed, lighting her tense face. Access logs unfurled, revealing a sickening pattern. Marcus Blackwood's credentials marked every critical juncture. His digital footprint covered her work files, communication logs, and research access points. This was no passing glance. He watched her methodically since her first day, recording keystrokes, downloads, and breaches. The truth struck her like a physical blow. His reports to Silas were brief, concise, damning. They listed her unusual activity, hushed calls, and nervous energy near Silas. Eleanor scrolled data pages. Each entry cut deeper into her security. Moments she felt alone, when her guard dropped, all documented by Marcus. Her casual conversations, subtle probes, twisted into proof of subterfuge. He built a dossier, a narrative of her deceit. A bitter taste filled her mouth, like ash. The air felt thin, hard to breathe. She was under constant, unwavering surveillance. Marcus Blackwood was Silas Thorne's eyes and ears, a ruthless shadow. He played his dangerous game, and she walked into it blindfolded, her hands clenched, nails digging into her palms. His cold, precise betrayal ignited furious anger. She had underestimated him, dismissed him as a henchman. This mistake could cost her everything. The server hum mocked her, reminding her of exposure. Isolation settled over Eleanor. Every planned move, every escape route felt compromised. They were not just watching, they anticipated her. The office, once leverage, became a well-appointed prison, its walls closing. Silas Thorne's lingering cologne smelled menacing, like a predator. She left the office before dawn, morning's chill on her heated skin. The city slept quietly. Eleanor found no peace. Her mind raced, sifting evidence. Every face, every remark, every glance seemed tainted by betrayal. The outside world felt menacing. In her discreet apartment, anonymity felt like mockery. Sparse furniture, unadorned walls, once comfort, now amplified her vulnerability. She paced the small living room, footsteps echoing. Arthur Vance's framed photo, his kind face, seemed a relic from a life untouched by deceit. Her escape routes, once secure, felt like flimsy sketches. She had a prepaid safe house. What if Marcus tracked her transfers? An intelligence contact. What if Silas compromised her network? Possibilities spiraled, tightening fear in her gut. She pulled out her burner phone, its cheap plastic rough. She dialed her contact, a memorized number. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. She tried again, then another. Each dead end confirmed her worst fears. They had cut her off. She was alone. Only her ragged breathing broke the silence, each inhale a struggle against panic. Eleanor sank onto her worn couch, rough fabric scratching her arm. Her head throbbed, a dull ache. She closed her eyes, trying to clear chaotic thoughts, to find logic. The taste of fear was acrid, sharp. A profound weariness settled, crushing her with exhaustion. She was trapped. Silas Thorne had known all along, welcoming her into his circle, watching her every move, letting her dig her own grave. He was a master manipulator, playing a game she barely understood. Her belief in outwitting him now seemed naive. Her gaze fell upon Arthur's tarnished watch on the small side table. Its dull silver caught faint light, marking a life cut short. She picked it up, feeling its familiar weight. A hairline crack mirrored the fissures in her resolve. The watch was cold, but its memory was warm. She remembered Arthur's laugh, a deep sound filling the room with warmth. It was hearty, genuine, often crinkling his eyes. She pictured him in his armchair, head back, recounting a silly anecdote. That pure joy echoed in her mind. It was the sound of a man who loved life, loved his family, and deserved justice. A tear escaped her eye, tracing a cold path. It was renewed grief, bringing fierce determination. Silas Thorne took her uncle from her, from the world. She promised herself to find the truth, to make them pay. That promise, forged in sorrow, was all that mattered. Isolation, danger, dwindling options. None extinguished her inner fire. Arthur's laugh, his innocent face, his kindness, became a shield against fear, a sword for her resolve. She would not disappear. She would not back down. This mission was no longer infiltration or evidence extraction. It was visceral, personal. She would face Silas Thorne and make him answer. She rose from the couch, stiff but resolute. Weariness lingered, a dull ache. Simmering anger, a cold fury overshadowed it. Her eyes, once desperate, held a steely glint. She moved to the window, staring at the city, sleeping oblivious to her silent war. As faint dawn streaks appeared, a soft scratching came from her apartment door. It was a delicate, almost imperceptible scrape. Eleanor froze, every nerve alert. The silence stretched, taut with anticipation. Her heart pounded. She moved slowly, silently, toward the door, reaching for the heavy lamp. Her fingers wrapped its cold metal base, ready to strike. She peered through the peephole, seeing only the empty corridor. She waited, holding her breath, listening to her frantic pulse. After a long moment, she slowly opened the door a crack. Outside her threshold lay a stark white invoice. It was plain, unaddressed, its edges crisp. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she picked it up. The paper felt thick, expensive, yet anonymous. She tore it open, her eyes scanning the single line. The words were stark, bold, and chillingly clear. Disappear or face the consequences. The anonymous note, a white rectangle on her dark apartment floor, felt like a judgment. It spoke of disappearance and consequences. Eleanor saw her subtle plans crumble. No options remained. A desperate, calculated push was now the only way forward. She crumpled the cheap paper, feeling the pulp give way. The stale dust of her small room seemed to cling to her, a suffocating presence. Her gaze found Arthur's framed photograph. His kind smile was a gentle reminder of stolen innocence. Cold anger settled deep in her bones. She would not disappear. This threat ignited a fierce resolve. She thought of the coded fragment, partially deciphered, a cryptic phrase haunting her for days. It was not a smoking gun, but a key. It whispered a secret, linking Silas Thorne to something larger and dark. Eleanor planned for hours. Her hands, usually steady, trembled reviewing the partial decryption. The abstract words meant something to her. She knew the language of Thorne's illicit dealings. She printed the fragment on a plain sheet, making it seem like an accidental printout, easily overlooked but strategically placed. She imagined Silas's cold gaze, the surprise she hoped to ignite. Her heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat in the lonely room. The Thorne estate office felt colder the next morning. Polished marble floors were slick beneath her sensible heels. The usual comfort of expensive coffee and old leather offered only more suffocating opulence. Eleanor clutched a stack of files, her fingers locked around the manila folders as if they were a lifeline. Arthur's watch in her pocket offered cold reassurance, a tangible link to her purpose. Silas Thorne sat at his immense desk, a dark silhouette against the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking manicured gardens. Morning light caught the sharp lines of his jaw, the subtle gleam in his dark eyes as he looked up. His gaze was immediate, unwavering. Eleanor felt a familiar shiver. He wore a dark suit, his posture relaxed, yet coiled and ready. "Eleanor," Silas said, his voice a low hum filling the vast office. It held no emotion, yet Eleanor sensed an undercurrent, a sharpened edge. "To what do I owe this early morning visit?" She forced a practiced smile, a fragile mask. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne. I was reviewing older financial reports, as you requested, specifically those from 5 years ago. I found a rather peculiar discrepancy." She approached his desk, placing the files down with a soft thud. Her hands felt clammy. She tasted the metallic tang of fear. Silas leaned back, his dark eyes fixed on her. He steepled his fingers, a gesture she knew signaled intense scrutiny. The air thickened with unspoken expectations. "Discrepancy, you say? What might that be?" His voice was calm, almost bored, a master of deception. Eleanor took a shallow breath. "It's less a financial discrepancy, sir, and more a linguistic one." She slid the printed fragment from her stack. Her movements were slow, deliberate, appearing natural. "I found this tucked into a ledger margin, handwritten, then typed on a separate sheet. It seemed out of place." She pushed the paper across his desk. Silas picked up the sheet. His discerning eyes scanned the words. A subtle tightening around his mouth, a clenching jaw were his only tells. Eleanor watched him, her heart pounding. She knew the words spoke of a transaction, a movement of assets tied to a location dangerously close to where Arthur had last been seen. "And what is so peculiar about this, Eleanor?" His voice was still calm, but held a dangerous edge. It was like a dark lake hiding unseen currents. He looked up, his gaze locking with hers, a probing stare seeking weakness, seeking truth. "The phrasing, Mr. Thorne," Eleanor replied, her voice carefully modulated, hiding the terror in her gut. "It uses unique identifiers. Crimson Tide, Iron Veil, Silent Harbor. They don't correspond to known company codes or financial terminology. I thought perhaps they might be an old internal code or personal shorthand." She watched him, desperate for a crack in his composure. He held her gaze, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, a taut wire humming with questions. His cologne, usually subtle, now felt overpowering. "Indeed," Silas murmured, his voice a low rumble. "You are quite observant, Eleanor." Many would have simply dismissed it. Eleanor felt cold relief, then colder dread. He had not dismissed it, he understood. "It caught my attention because of the ledger's date," she pressed on, emboldened. "It was around the same time as a significant event I recall hearing about. A disruption, perhaps. 5 years ago this autumn." She left the phrase hanging, a silent accusation of Arthur's death. Silas's gaze sharpened, becoming predatory. He slowly lowered the paper, his fingers brushing the words. "You are referring to the unfortunate incident," he said, his voice dropping lower. "A difficult time for everyone involved." He was testing her, gauging her knowledge. Eleanor swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Yes, sir, I just wondered if there was any connection. These terms sound like a code for something bigger than numbers." She watched his eyes for truth. Arthur's watch in her pocket felt warmer, as if absorbing her fear, radiating his silent plea for justice. A cold, unsettling smile touched Silas's lips. It was not amusement, but recognition of her dangerous game. "You have a vivid imagination, Eleanor," he said, his words soft as silk, cutting like tempered steel. "Or perhaps you have been digging into matters that do not concern a secretary." The implication was a clear, subtle warning. "I am simply trying to be thorough, Mr. Thorne," she countered, her voice betraying unintended defiance. to understand the historical context of the documents I'm reviewing. She tried to keep her hands still, but a slight tremor ran through her fingertips. The air crackled with tension, every word double-edged. Silas leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. His eyes never left hers. Eleanor saw a chilling mix of amusement and something far more dangerous. Thoroughness is a valuable trait, Eleanor, but sometimes a little knowledge can be dangerous, especially when one draws wrong conclusions from incomplete information. He picked up the paper again, his thumb brushing crimson tide. "I only seek clarity, sir," Eleanor insisted, her voice barely a whisper. The anonymous note, the threat of disappearance, spurred her on. She had come too far for answers. These codes, the date, was my uncle involved? The question hung, a daring challenge, a desperate plea. Silas's expression remained calm, his eyes unblinking. He looked at the paper, then back at Eleanor. A slow, deliberate movement. The silence stretched, heavier this time, pregnant with revelation. He took a long, measured breath. When he spoke, his voice was still low, still calm, but held a chilling finality. "Your uncle, Arthur Vance," Silas began, each word precise, "was indeed familiar with Crimson Tide, Eleanor. He was not just an innocent bystander. Arthur was one of its architects, a man who helped lay the foundations." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. The world tilted. The words struck her like a physical blow, shattering the image of her uncle she had carried for 5 long years. The air in Silas's office grew heavy, thick with the scent of old leather. Eleanor felt his words hit her, a cold, sickening wave. Her uncle, Arthur Vance, involved in his organization, shattered her world. It had been built on a simple narrative of good and evil. She clutched the mahogany desk, knuckles white, her vision blurred with disbelief and a terrifying understanding. The room, usually a fortress of secrets, felt like a cage. Silas watched her, his dark eyes unwavering, showing calm precision. "Arthur was not innocent, Eleanor," Silas said, his voice a low hum. It cut through the ringing in her ears. He leaned back, settling in to deliver an uncomfortable truth. He was drowning in debt, gambling away his family's legacy, desperate for a way out. Eleanor shook her head, a desperate gesture. "No, that is a lie. My uncle was honest. He was good." The words felt hollow, like sand. Her heart pounded, a frantic rhythm of resistance. She remembered his kind face, his weary smile, the scent of old books. "Honest men do not seek out men like me for investment opportunities," Silas countered. His tone held no judgment, merely stating a fact. A faint, cold smile touched his lips. "He came to me, Eleanor, many times. He offered information, access to networks, anything to clear his ledger." Bitter bile rose in Eleanor's throat. She remembered subtle changes in Arthur. A new suit, unexpected gifts, vague answers about money. She had dismissed them as luck. Now those memories twisted into something sinister. Her uncle, the man she revered, a desperate informant. The betrayal stung, sharper than any blow. Silas continued, his voice steady. He painted a picture she tried desperately to unsee. He was invaluable for a time. He charmed people, extracting details. He believed himself clever, untouchable. There was a hint of detached respect for Arthur's cunning. Loyalty is fickle, especially when money is involved. A single tear escaped Eleanor, tracing a hot path down her cold cheek. It was not just grief for Arthur. It was profound sorrow for his shattered image. The driving force of her mission, her righteous anger, dissolved into confusion and doubt. Everything she thought she knew was an illusion. "He tried to play both sides," Silas explained, his fingers steepled, belling information to me, then a diluted version to a rival. "He grew greedy, Eleanor. He thought he could outsmart everyone." A subtle shift, a tightening around his eyes, flickered beneath his controlled exterior. "And you had him killed," Eleanor whispered. The accusation was now a desperate plea for a simpler villain. She needed him to be the monster, to justify her actions. The office lights seemed to dim, casting long, accusing shadows. Silas held her gaze, a profound stillness about him. "I am a businessman, Eleanor, a man of order." He rose slowly, moving to the window overlooking his estate. The muted afternoon sun reflected the somber mood. "Arthur Vance chose a path. He understood the risks. When he broke trust, when he threatened my operations, there were consequences. He turned back, his face a complex mask of indifference and something almost like regret. I did not personally kill him, as you put it, but I ensure those who betray me understand the gravity of their actions. Arthur knew this. He accepted the terms when he first approached me. The words hung heavy, implying his justice. Eleanor sank into a chair. Her hands trembled violently. She interlaced her fingers. The intricate ceiling patterns mocked her, spinning with her thoughts. Silas had not denied his role. He reframed it, not as murder, but as necessary discipline. He was not the pure monster she envisioned. He was a force, a system, an inevitable consequence. This moral ambiguity was more terrifying than simple evil. It meant Arthur was not a helpless victim, but a player who lost. This revelation tore at her, shredding her identity and purpose. What you are telling me changes everything, Eleanor managed, her voice raw. The truth felt like a physical blow. The scent of Silas's cologne, once a reminder of her enemy, now encapsulated the man. Power, danger, unsettling candor. Silas merely nodded, watching her with unsettling patience. Truth has a way of doing that. He walked back to his desk, picking up a heavy letter opener. He traced its design, a small gesture of contemplation. You came seeking vengeance for a simple crime. You found something far more intricate, did you not? He placed the opener down with a soft click. A chilling understanding dawned on Eleanor. Silas had known. Her mission, her desperate need for justice, was laid bare. He had allowed her to play it out, perhaps offering a chance to see the truth. Her face burned with humiliation, mixing with grief and betrayal. Not just from Arthur, but from her own naive belief in a clear-cut world. She had entered this lion's den with blinders on, fueled by an incomplete narrative. The concealed pen recorder, now useless, felt like a pathetic child's toy. My uncle was not a saint, she finally conceded, the words like ash. Fresh tears blurred Silas's imposing figure. But he was still my uncle. He still deserved better than this. The this hung unspoken, encompassing his brutal end and the terrible web of deceit that had entangled her. Silas met her gaze. For a fleeting moment, Eleanor thought she saw understanding, perhaps pity, in his impassive eyes. It was a warmth, quickly extinguished, leaving only the cold glint of intelligence. Everyone believes they deserve better, Eleanor. Yet few truly earn it. Fewer still understand the price of their choices. The conversation had shifted. It was no longer about her mission, but about her understanding. The man she had demonized had systematically dismantled her worldview. He had shown her the ugliness of her own family, the complicity of the man she loved. Eleanor thought of the tarnished watch, its cracked face frozen at Arthur's death. It was no longer pure vengeance, but a relic of a tragic, complex life. The cold metal against her skin, once a reminder, felt heavy with deceit and misjudgment. She had carried this burden, this pure hatred, only to find it directed at a half-truth. Her heart ached, a deep, hollow pain. The desire for revenge, once a burning fire, was now a smoldering ember, choked by ash and doubt. What now? What was left when righteous anger was stripped away, leaving only a bitter, complicated sorrow? Silas watched her, his presence an overwhelming force. He had given her his version of the truth, a truth that shattered her purpose, leaving her adrift in moral ambiguity. The air, once thick with confrontation, pulsed with the quiet hum of an unbearable choice. Eleanor felt its weight pressed down. She could still expose Silas, use whatever fragments of evidence she had, but what would that achieve? It would not restore Arthur's innocence. It would only bring down a complex, dangerous man whose actions, in his twisted world, might be considered justifiable. In doing so, she would reveal her own deception, destroy her reputation, and likely endanger her life. Or she could walk away. She could let this complex, awful truth remain buried. She could acknowledge the terrible cost of her uncle's choices and the brutal justice that followed. She could seek a different path, a personal peace, one that recognized shades of gray. Perhaps some battles were never truly won, only endured. The choice loomed before her, stark and terrifying. She saw two equally devastating futures. Expose him and lose herself or live with this crushing truth, seeking a justice more about healing than retribution. Her breath hitched, caught between the two abysses. The apartment felt like a tomb, silent and cold, the only light spilling from a single lamp on her nightstand. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, the framed photograph of Arthur Vance clutched in her hands. His smile, forever etched in the faded paper, mocked her with its innocence. She had believed his death a simple tragedy, a clear-cut act of evil. Now Silas Thorne's words echoed, shattering that fragile certainty into a million jagged pieces. Arthur had not been merely a victim. He had been a participant, tangled in the very web that claimed his life. The dust motes danced in the lamp's glow, each one a tiny floating fragment of her shattered world. A deep ache settled in her chest, heavier than grief, sharper than betrayal. It was the crushing weight of knowing, the burden of a truth too complex for simple vengeance. Her uncle, the man she adored, the moral compass of her youth, had walked willingly into shadows. How could she avenge a man who had, in some twisted fury, contributed to his own demise? Her fingers traced the hairline crack on Arthur's tarnished watch, a symbol now not just of loss, but of complicated, messy reality. The cold metal pressed against her skin, a grounding sensation in the swirl of her thoughts. Sleep offered no escape. The images of Silas, his piercing eyes, his controlled voice, mingled with the phantom touch of Arthur's hand. She remembered the warmth of her uncle's laughter, the way he smelled of old books and fresh coffee. Now that warmth was tainted with the knowledge of his hidden dealings, his unspoken pacts. The carefully constructed narrative of her life, of her mission, had imploded. She stared at the ceiling, the anonymous sounds of the city outside offering no comfort. The choice, Silas had said, was hers. Expose him and drag Arthur's name through the mud, destroying any shred of his memory she cherished. Or find another way, a path less clear, more painful, yet perhaps more honorable to the man she thought she knew. Her mind wrestled with the implications. To simply walk away felt like a surrender, a betrayal of the fiery resolve that had fueled her for so long. To stay and fight, knowing the truth, felt like a desecration. A single tear traced a path down her temple, cool against her skin, a testament to the agony of her dilemma. The taste of salt was sharp on her lips. She closed her eyes, seeking an answer in the darkness, a way to reconcile the man she loved with the truth she now carried. There had to be a way to honor Arthur's memory without destroying it completely. There had to be. The next morning, the Thorne estate office felt different, heavier, as if the air itself knew the gravity of the decision she carried. The polished mahogany desk gleamed under the soft light, reflecting Eleanor's weary face. She noted the scent of beeswax polish, usually comforting, now seemed to mock the hollowness inside her. She had made her choice, a path carved from heartbreak and a desperate need for a different kind of justice. It was a choice that acknowledged the brutality of their world, the shades of gray, and the fierce, unyielding bond that had, against all odds, formed between her and Silas. She knocked softly on Silas's office door, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The sound was swallowed by the thick silence within. A low voice bid her enter. Silas sat behind his large desk, bathed in the cool light filtering through the tall windows. His posture was relaxed, yet his dark eyes held an intensity that could strip away any pretense. The faint scent of his expensive cologne, once a sign of danger, now carried a strange familiarity. He made no move, offered no greeting, simply watched her, waiting. Eleanor walked slowly, deliberately, until she stood before his desk. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with secrets and revelations. She could hear the faint, distant chime of a clock somewhere in the house, marking the passage of moments that felt eternal. "I understand," she began, her voice steady, surprisingly devoid of the tremor she felt within. The words felt foreign on her tongue, heavy with an admission she never thought she would make. Silas's gaze remained unwavering. "Do you, Eleanor?" His voice was a low murmur, a dangerous question that sought to probe the depths of her soul. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the desk, his focus absolute. "Arthur? He made his choices," Eleanor continued, her eyes fixed on his, searching for something, anything beyond the calculating facade. A flicker of pain, perhaps, or a hint of understanding. He walked into that world, and he paid the price. The admission was a wrenching twist in her gut, a betrayal of the simpler narrative she had clung to for so long. But it was the truth. A sigh, barely audible, escaped Silas. Yes, he did. There was no triumph in his tone, only a weary acknowledgement of a shared, brutal reality. He picked up a solid silver letter opener, turning it slowly in his fingers. The soft metallic gleam caught the light. "You allowed me to come this far," Eleanor said, her voice gaining a quiet strength. "You knew who I was. You knew what I wanted." The unspoken accusation hung in the air, yet it was also a recognition of his strange, dangerous mercy. He had played a game, but he had also shown her a different truth. Silas met her gaze directly. "You were an interesting variable, Eleanor, and you asked the right questions." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, fleeting, almost imperceptible. Some truths need to be unearthed, even if the ground is treacherous. He paused, the silence stretching between them. "What will you do now?" Eleanor swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. The choice she had made was not about vengeance. Not anymore. It was about acceptance, about finding peace in the ruins of her understanding. "I won't expose Arthur," she said, her voice firm, the words a commitment to her uncle's flawed legacy. "His memory deserves what peace it can find." Her eyes held his, a silent plea for that peace to be respected. A subtle shift in Silas's expression. The tension in his shoulders seemed to ease, almost imperceptibly. He knew the cost of her decision. "And you?" he asked, his voice softer now, laced with a complexity that transcended their roles. "What peace will you find?" Eleanor felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. Not here, not now. She had walked into this lion's den seeking blood, and instead found a mirror reflecting her own shattered ideals. The deep, unspoken connection forged between them, born of deception and dangerous truths, hung in the air, a silent acknowledgement of their intertwining paths. It was a bond she had never anticipated, a raw, honest understanding that had bloomed in the most desolate of places. She took a deep breath, the scent of leather and old paper filling her lungs. "I will walk away from this," she stated, her voice quiet but resolute. "From all of it." Her eyes swept around the opulent office, the symbols of his power, the cage she had willingly entered. It was a world she no longer belonged in, a path she could no longer follow. Silas simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Perhaps that is the wisest course." He placed the letter opener back on the desk, its metallic click echoing in the stillness. "But be warned, Eleanor, the shadows you've seen here, they have a way of lingering." Eleanor felt a cold shiver run down her spine, not of fear, but of profound understanding. She knew the truth of his words. The world she had inhabited, the man before her, had changed her irrevocably. There was no going back to the naive girl who had first stepped into this office. Her heart ached with a bittersweet acceptance. She had lost her innocence, but gained a brutal, hard-won wisdom. She turned to leave, her hand already on the heavy brass doorknob. The weight of it felt immense. Before she stepped out, she glanced back one last time. Silas Thorne was still watching her, his dark eyes holding a depth she could not quite decipher. In that brief, charged moment, there was a silent farewell, a dangerous understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the paths they had walked and the paths they would never walk together. The tension that had bound them for so long found its release not in an explosion, but in a quiet, profound acceptance. Eleanor stepped out, closing the door softly behind her. The corridor felt strangely empty. She walked past Marcus Blackwood's office, feeling a tremor of the old fear, but it was distant now, a faint echo. As she descended the grand staircase, her hand brushed against the cool, smooth marble. Each step took her further from the ornate prison, further from the man who had shattered her illusions and reshaped her world. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Thorne estate. The air was crisp, carrying the distant scent of pine trees. She looked back at the imposing mansion, its dark stone facade holding so many secrets, so much pain, so much power. It had been her battlefield, her crucible. She turned away, her gaze fixed on the winding driveway, then the open gate. The car waiting for her seemed like a vessel to a different life. Her soul, raw and exposed, was irrevocably changed by grief, by deception, and by the profound, unspoken bond she had developed with the man she had come to destroy. She carried the weight of her choices, a silent, heavy burden, into an uncertain future. What would you have done? One line in the comments. Let's argue it out together. Where did the story catch you? Which scene made you stop and think? A small like is a small move, but it's a big support for this channel. See you in the next story. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The apartment felt like a tomb, silent and cold, the only light spilling from a single lamp on her nightstand. Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, the framed photograph of Arthur Vance clutched in her hands. His smile, forever etched in the faded paper, mocked her with its innocence. She had believed his death a simple tragedy, a clear-cut act of evil. Now Silas Thorne's words echoed, shattering that fragile certainty into a million jagged pieces. Arthur had not been merely a victim. He had been a participant, tangled in the very web that claimed his life. The dust motes danced in the lamp's glow, each one a tiny floating fragment of her shattered world. A deep ache settled in her chest, heavier than grief, sharper than betrayal. It was the crushing weight of knowing, the burden of a truth too complex for simple vengeance. Her uncle, the man she adored, the moral compass of her youth, had walked willingly into shadows. How could she avenge a man who had, in some twisted way, contributed to his own demise? Her fingers traced the hairline crack on Arthur's tarnished watch, a symbol now not just of loss, but of complicated, messy reality. The cold metal pressed against her skin, a grounding sensation in the swirl of her thoughts. Sleep offered no escape. The images of Silas, his piercing eyes, his controlled voice, mingled with the phantom touch of Arthur's hand. She remembered the warmth of her uncle's laughter, the way he smelled of old books and fresh coffee. Now that warmth was tainted with the knowledge of his hidden dealings, his unspoken pacts. The carefully constructed narrative of her life, of her mission, had imploded. She stared at the ceiling, the anonymous sounds of the city outside offering no comfort. The choice, Silas had said, was hers. Expose him and drag Arthur's name through the mud, destroying any shred of his memory she cherished. Or find another way, a path less clear, more painful, yet perhaps more honorable to the man she thought she knew. Her mind wrestled with the implications. To simply walk away felt like a surrender, a betrayal of the fiery resolve that had fueled her for so long. To stay and fight, knowing the truth, felt like a desecration. A single tear traced a path down her temple, cool against her skin, a testament to the agony of her dilemma. The taste of salt was sharp on her lips. She closed her eyes, seeking an answer in the darkness, a way to reconcile the man she loved with the truth she now carried. There had to be a way to honor Arthur's memory without destroying it completely. There had to be. The next morning, the Thorne estate office felt different, heavier, as if the air itself knew the gravity of the decision she carried. The polished mahogany desk gleamed under the soft light, reflecting Eleanor's weary face. She noted the scent of beeswax polish, usually comforting, now seemed to mock the hollowness inside her. She had made her choice, a path carved from heartbreak and a desperate need for a different kind of justice. It was a choice that acknowledged the brutality of their world, the shades of gray, and the fierce, unyielding bond that had, against all odds, formed between her and Silas. She knocked softly on Silas's office door, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The sound was swallowed by the thick silence within. A low voice bid her enter. Silas sat behind his large desk, bathed in the cool light filtering through the tall windows. His posture was relaxed, yet his dark eyes held an intensity that could strip away any pretense. The faint scent of his expensive cologne, once a sign of danger, now carried a strange familiarity. He made no move, offered no greeting, simply watched her, waiting. Eleanor walked slowly, deliberately, until she stood before his desk. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with secrets and revelations. She could hear the faint, distant chime of a clock somewhere in the house, marking the passage of moments that felt eternal. I understand, she began, her voice steady, surprisingly devoid of the tremor she felt within. The words felt foreign on her tongue, heavy with an admission she never thought she would make. Silas's gaze remained unwavering. Do you, Eleanor? His voice was a low murmur, a dangerous question that sought to probe the depths of her soul. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the desk, his focus absolute. Arthur? He made his choices, Eleanor continued, her eyes fixed on his, searching for something, anything, beyond the calculating facade. A flicker of pain, perhaps, or a hint of understanding. He walked into that world, and he paid the price. The admission was a wrenching twist in her gut, a betrayal of the simpler narrative she had clung to for so long. But it was the truth. A sigh, barely audible, escaped Silas. Yes, he did. There was no triumph in his tone, only a weary acknowledgement of a shared, brutal reality. He picked up a solid silver letter opener, turning it slowly in his fingers. The soft metallic gleam caught the light. You allowed me to come this far, Eleanor said, her voice gaining a quiet strength. You knew who I was. You knew what I wanted. The unspoken accusation hung in the air, yet it was also a recognition of his strange, dangerous mercy. He had played a game, but he had also shown her a different truth. Silas met her gaze directly. You were an interesting variable, Eleanor, and you asked the right questions. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, fleeting, almost imperceptible. Some truths need to be unearthed, even if the ground is treacherous. He paused, the silence stretching between them. What will you do now? Eleanor swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. The choice she had made was not about vengeance, not anymore. It was about acceptance, about finding peace in the ruins of her understanding. I won't expose Arthur, she said, her voice firm, the words a commitment to her uncle's flawed legacy. His memory deserves what peace it can find. Her eyes held his, a silent plea for that peace to be respected. A subtle shift in Silas's expression. The tension in his shoulders seemed to ease, almost imperceptibly. He knew the cost of her decision. And you? He asked, his voice softer now, laced with a complexity that transcended their roles. What peace will you find? Eleanor felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. Not here, not now. She had walked into this lion's den seeking blood, and instead found a mirror reflecting her own shattered ideals. The deep, unspoken connection forged between them, born of deception and dangerous truths, hung in the air, a silent acknowledgement of their intertwining paths. It was a bond she had never anticipated, a raw, honest understanding that had blossomed in the most desolate of places. She took a deep breath, the scent of leather and old paper filling her lungs. I will walk away from this, she stated, her voice quiet but resolute. From all of it. Her eyes swept around the opulent office, the symbols of his power, the cage she had willingly entered. It was a world she no longer belonged in, a path she could no longer follow. Silas simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Perhaps that is the wisest course. He placed the letter opener back on the desk, its metallic click echoing in the stillness. But be warned, Eleanor, the shadows you've seen here, they have a way of lingering. Eleanor felt a cold shiver run down her spine, not of fear but of profound understanding. She knew the truth of his words. The world she had inhabited, the man before her, had changed her irrevocably. There was no going back to the naive girl who had first stepped into this office. Her heart ached with a bittersweet acceptance. She had lost her innocence, but gained a brutal, hard-won wisdom. She turned to leave, her hand already on the heavy brass doorknob. The weight of it felt immense. Before she stepped out, she glanced back one last time. Silas Thorne was still watching her, his dark eyes holding a depth she could not quite decipher. In that brief, charged moment, there was a silent farewell, a dangerous understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the paths they had walked and the paths they would never walk together. The tension that had bound them for so long found its release not in an explosion, but in a quiet, profound acceptance. Eleanor stepped out, closing the door softly behind her. The corridor felt strangely empty. She walked past Marcus Blackwood's office, feeling a tremor of the old fear. But it was distant now, a faint echo, As she descended the grand staircase, her hand brushed against the cool, smooth marble. Each step took her further from the ornate prison, further from the man who had shattered her illusions and reshaped her world. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Thorne estate. The air was crisp, carrying the distant scent of pine trees. She looked back at the imposing mansion, its dark stone facade holding so many secrets, so much pain, so much power. It had been her battlefield, her crucible. She turned away, her gaze fixed on the winding driveway, then the open gate. The car waiting for her seemed like a vessel to a different life. Her soul, raw and exposed, was irrevocably changed by grief, by deception, and by the profound, unspoken bond she had developed with the man she had come to destroy. She carried the weight of her choices, a silent, heavy burden, into an uncertain future. What would you have done? One line in the comments. Let's argue it out together. Where did the story catch you? Which scene made you stop and think? A small like is a small move, but it's a big support for this channel. See you in the next story, Shua. Well, subscribe so you don't miss it.